The Nintendo Switch 2 is officially 1 year old, and what a wild year it has been. As the follow-up to what is likely Nintendo's most successful console of all time, the Nintendo Switch 2 has a lot to live up to. Is the Switch 2 off to a good start? Does its first year on the market compare to the Switch 1? Will Mother 3 ever be localized? Join me in the Switch 2 Year 1 retrospective to find the answers and more. Everything begins on January 16th, 2025, the day of reckoning, and Donkey Kong Country Returns HD's release day. Yeah, odd choice for Nintendo to tease their next home console and take eyes off their newest release, but then again, it's Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. Were there really that many eyes on it to begin with? The teaser was exciting, but only about 2 minutes long. We learned the screen would be larger and the kickstand would be improved. The Joy-Cons got a redesign and would now snap in horizontally rather than vertically, as well as the console's official name reveal, the Nintendo Switch 2. That's a little underwhelming. Nintendo has never been shy about making console successors. The Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, the Wii to the Wii U, the DS to the 3DS, all consoles heavily derived from their previous iterations. But never are they given an illustrious number to describe the successor. While I was always firmly in the Super Nintendo Switch camp, as an homage to the original NES and Super Nintendo, I can see why Nintendo would want to take as few risks as possible, especially after the entire Wii U marketing debacle.
Yeah, look like I've been upgraded.
A clean 2 makes it abundantly apparent what this is, a bigger, better Switch, and while it's not as exciting a name, it is most definitely effective. The teaser also revealed a snippet of the next mainline Mario Kart, a 2025 release window, confirmation of full backwards compatibility, and a date for a Nintendo Switch 2 Direct on April 2nd, the big blowout showcase. This was an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan. Theories and rumors were flying all over the place about console specs, upcoming titles, and whatever the hell this unlabeled button is. We wouldn't have to wait long, as only a few months later on April 2nd, we had the first Nintendo Switch 2 Direct where everything would be revealed. During the wait for the Direct, Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition was released. I picked it up, but decided against playing it right away, as I'm sure there'd be a dedicated Switch 2 patch released at some point with 4K support and improved frame rate. Any day now. The Switch 2 Direct opened with a reveal trailer for the next entry in the Mario Kart series, Mario Kart World, and it looks incredible. 24-player racing, the art direction is gorgeous, a substantial step up from Mario Kart 8. They show off new mechanics like rail grinding and wall riding, new items, costumes for every character, and an entire open world. Right off the bat, this game looks to be the ultimate Mario Kart, an incredibly strong opener. Afterwards, we're introduced to our hosts for the event, Koichi Kawamoto, Takuhiro Dota, and Tetsuya Sasaki, the producer, director, and hardware design lead of the Nintendo Switch 2 respectively. We're given a bit more information on Mario Kart World through an overview trailer. They introduced Knockout Tour, an elimination style mode, and a free roam mode where you can freely explore the open world with friends. The game is confirmed to launch with the system and have its own dedicated direct just a few weeks later on April 17th. Following this, we finally get our answer for our mysterious button, which is now known as the C button. The C button is used to activate Game Chat, which is essentially Discord. I'm glad Nintendo has its own party system, especially after the disaster that was the Nintendo Switch mobile app's voice chat, but I can't help but feel that it's too little too late. I have no doubt this is a great feature for younger kids, but it also feels like such a strange thing to make a big deal out of in your blowout presentation when Sony and Microsoft have been doing this for years. The technology behind the microphone's voice isolation is impressive, and the camera integration in games can be really entertaining. But I can't see myself or many others using Game Chat long term. Nintendo then confirmed that after March 31st, 2026, Game Chat will require a Nintendo Switch Online subscription to access, effectively making it so that nobody outside of hardcore fans will ever utilize the feature, which is unfortunate. Party chat features have been free on PlayStation and Xbox platforms for years. I see no reason to paywall Game Chat behind an NSO subscription, especially when it has a dedicated button on your controller. Next up is Game Share, a feature that allows you to play games locally and online using only one copy of a given title, sorta like DS Download Play from back in the day. This is a fantastic addition, and oddly consumer-friendly for Nintendo. It is pretty limited in selection so far, but allowing players to try games their friends have or turn games that don't have online multiplayer into online Game Share compatible titles is awesome. It's also cross-gen compatible since it works via streaming, meaning Switch 1 can technically play compatible Switch 2 exclusive games, which is super cool. Next up, we got an overview of the console itself. a 7.9-inch screen, 1080p resolution handheld, 4K docked, HDR support, 120Hz support, magnetic Joy-Cons, bigger buttons and sticks, mouse controls, a built-in mic, 3D audio support, more onboard storage, and a second USB-C slot. Yes! This looked amazing. Nearly every aspect of the original Switch was being improved substantially. I never expected 120Hz support, but I am so glad it's here, especially as this will allow for more demanding games to utilize 40 FPS performance modes. 4K docked and 1080p handheld were no-brainers. Nearly everyone and their mother saw that coming from a mile away, but it's nice to have it confirmed. Mouse controls are another thing I didn't see coming, but that's a great control option to have, especially for first-person shooters and strategy games. I could absolutely see myself using mouse mode, especially if it's integrated well and feels comfortable to hold. Thankfully, it looks like we'll be able to test out all these features and more in the Switch 2's upcoming tech demo, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. It always felt odd that the Switch never had any pre-installed software or minigames to try out as the 3DS did. The Wii U at least had Miiverse to explore. The closest thing the Switch had to a showcase piece was 1-2-Switch, and that cost a whole ass $60 and was bad. I think it's fair to say that after the success of Astro's Playroom on the PS5, a free pack-in title showcasing the console strengths is a very safe play for Nintendo and other manufacturers. Welcome Tour doesn't look to be anything crazy. It seems to gamify a variety of tech demos into a virtual museum that players can explore, trying out all the new hardware features and accessories like mouse mode and the camera. I mean, hey, what can you really expect of a free pack? Are you f***ing kidding me? Nintendo, this was the freest layup you have ever missed. Why are you charging for a tech demo? It doesn't even hide that it's a tech demo. It has the console's full legal name in its title. The amount of goodwill alone that was unabashedly shattered from this decision makes me think that having no tech demo at all would have been a better decision here, at least from a PR perspective. Realistically, who is buying this game aside from people like me? The point of a tech demo is to explore the features of your system with an audience who may not understand the appeal of these inclusions or know of them at all. Whatever. One bad decision from businessmen in suits isn't going to kill the hype, but man do I feel like this could have been easily avoided. From here, we gotta look at the Pro Controller, differences in game cards and SD card storage requirements, and a release date for the system, and by extension, Mario Kart World and Welcome Tour, June 5th, 2025. A bit later than I expected. I was hoping for an early May release to start off the summer early, but hey, a good half-year release date is timely and appropriate for a cheerful game like Mario Kart. Now that we got the hardware and specs out of the way, it's time to talk games. First, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition titles. Upgraded Nintendo Switch 1 games with additional feature compatibility, resolution, and performance enhancements, additional content, and more. The first one they revealed was teased a bit earlier. It's Super Mario Party Jamboree, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Jamboree TV. We really couldn't have gone any shorter on the names, huh? This upgrade adds 4K support, new modes, and minigames that utilize the camera, mic, and mouse modes. Mario Party is usually ripe for DLC expansions and never seems to get any, so it's about time we got an expansion for one of the series' best titles. The expansion looks a little gimmicky for my liking, but Mario Party usually revels in gimmicky modes and minigames, so I'll give it a shot. It releases July 24th and has both a physical release and a standalone digital upgrade pack if you own the original. Next up are both The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Nintendo Switch 2 Edition and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. I always thought Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom looked great at their original frame rates and resolutions, but seeing them in 4K with a higher range of colors and at double the frame rate, I feel like I've seen the light for the first time. Both games will support integration with Zelda Notes, an extension of the Nintendo Switch mobile app which allows you to save and upload your schematics to and from the internet, as well as use what is essentially ways to find nearby Korok seeds and other items. Afterwards, we got Kirby and the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Star-Crossed World. God, I cannot stand this company sometimes. Forgotten Land was a pretty prime target for a Switch 2 enhancement. 1080p 30 FPS sufficed, but man does this game just pop in 4K, and the smoother frame rate is a must. Kirby games don't often get DLC expansions, if ever, but as Kirby's first 3D entry, Forgotten Land DLC seemed like an obvious win for HAL Laboratories. Star-Crossed World seems to mostly reuse assets from the base game with some otherworldly twist, remixing and shuffling the original game's levels, but if this expansion is anywhere near as good as the base game, this will certainly be an upgrade to keep an eye on. Next up is Metroid Prime 4 Beyond Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, and man does this game look good. Metroid Prime 4 is looking absolutely gorgeous, and the atmosphere is unreal. I don't think the power of the Switch 2 really set in for me until we got the spec details for Prime 4, with the quality mode running at 4K 60 and the performance mode running at 1080p 120 FPS. This really set the bar for performance on Nintendo releases in my opinion. Having Nintendo's premier first-person shooter running at a buttery smooth 120 FPS in docked and handheld is incredibly impressive, especially for a little 12-watt tablet. While the original Switch has many first-person shooters of its own, nearly all of them ran at subpar resolutions and frame rates, clearly downgraded from their PlayStation and Xbox counterparts. The only exception I can think of is Metroid Prime Remastered, which, while excellent, is a remaster of a GameCube game. As a new title, even if cross-gen, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is an incredibly marketable title for more mature gaming audiences, and specs like these are sure to entice many. The last Switch 2 edition revealed by Nintendo is Pokémon Legends ZA Nintendo Switch 2 edition, and yep, that is certainly a modern Pokémon game. At least it doesn't seem to succumb to the performance issues that plague Scarlet and Violet. Even the Switch 1 footage we've seen up to this point has looked pretty alright. Maybe Legends ZA might end up being somewhat playable. That's it for Switch 2 editions, but we've got another first-party Nintendo release that heavily features Switch 2 mouse controls, DragX Drive. DragX Drive seems to be this generation's 1-2 Switch, and by that I mean it looks fucking putrid. DragX Drive is a 3v3 wheelchair basketball game where you control each wheel by sliding the Joy-Cons as mice. It's a neat concept, and it looks to push the mouse and motion controls to their fullest, but I can't help but feel like this game looks incredibly bland. All the characters are these faceless gray husks that wheel around an empty, lifeless void of an arena. Then again, this seems to be just a teaser. There's plenty of time before its release window of summer 2025 for a better showing. Surely this is only one character and one arena of many that will be in the final game. Surely. Taking a break from Nintendo releases, we get a look at some upcoming third-party titles, and holy shit, that's Elden Ring. Yeah, with the Switch 1, it took Nintendo a lot of time to rebuild the trust they lost with the Wii U. Publishers didn't trust that the Switch would be a success. After a few years, however, the dust began to settle and third-party games and miracle Switch ports began to flow in a lot more quickly. With the Switch 2, publishers know out of the gate, this platform is gonna be big, and you do not want to miss the gravy train before it leaves the station. Elden Ring gets a definitive, tarnished edition with the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion included and a few extra new goodies. Hades 2 is confirmed as a timed console exclusive, Street Fighter 6 gets ported with the first 2 years of DLC included, new control modes and amiibo figures, Daemon X Machina gets a sequel, Split Fiction is confirmed to come to Switch 2 just a few weeks after it released on other platforms, Madden NFL will be coming to a Nintendo platform for the first time in years, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3+4 is releasing day and date with the other platforms, and also SpongeBob is here. Okay, sure. Hitman, 007, Bravely Default, Yakuza 0, the games we want to see are here and they're here now. These are all excellent showcase titles covering a wide variety of genres and demographics, comforting players and letting them know that Nintendo isn't playing around. Confirming next-gen and blockbuster games like Split Fiction, Street Fighter 6, and Elden Ring reassures us that the Switch 2 is comparable enough to next-generation platforms that games won't be missing out due to hardware constraints anymore. After that barrage of announcements, we get a short look at the next entry in the Hyrule Warriors series, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. I think a Warriors prequel to Tears of the Kingdom in the same way that Age of Calamity was a prequel to Breath of the Wild was a pretty safe bet to make. Koei Tecmo and Nintendo have been collaborating on projects like these for nearly a decade now, so one last Warriors title to bookend the Breath of the Wild saga of Zelda feels appropriate. I always enjoy the Warriors titles, but aside from the definitive edition of the original Hyrule Warriors, these games are always pretty compromised on Switch with pretty unstable resolution and performance. They were still a good time, for sure, expanding upon the lore and the characters of mainline entries in the Zelda and Fire Emblem series, but Age of Imprisonment seems to be a much more approachable and enjoyable experience just by the virtue of running at higher than 12 frames per second. Holy shit! Nintendo Switch Online has really turned itself around, man. What once was a small offering of only 20 NES games has evolved into a selection of roughly 300 Nintendo classics across multiple generations. And for only $50 a year for the expansion pack, you can't beat that deal, man. While I would still like the option to buy games individually, it is inarguable at this point that NSO is a fair deal. It does feel a little odd though that Nintendo would offer GameCube games on Switch Online, as we've gotten a handful of remakes of GameCube games on Switch at full price before, and even some remasters. Will games like Pikmin and Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door not appear on NSO because they have modern releases available? Link's Awakening and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon both have remakes on Switch and their original releases on NSO, so maybe? At launch, GameCube NSO will have F-Zero GX, Soul Calibur 2, and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. While this is a much smaller starting lineup than previous NSO launches, we're reaching console generations where games get much larger in size and take more time to complete. It would have been nice to have more at launch, but they've confirmed more on the way. As long as they drop them at a steady pace, I think this is fine. Another barrage of third-party games, Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4, Borderlands 4, Civilization 7, WWE 2K, NBA 2K, Cyberpunk 2077, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Star Wars Outlaws, Hollow Knight Silksong, Fast Fusion, Fortnite, and a plethora of others. I had already been impressed with the Elden Ring and Split Fiction announcements, so to follow that up with next-gen versions of Cyberpunk 2077 and Final Fantasy VII Remake was a powerful combo. Getting support from AAA developers with nearly uncompromised versions of the latest releases puts Nintendo in a position it hasn't been in since the GameCube era. Deltarune and Hollow Knight Silksong were also great showpieces. They may not be demanding titles, but they are certainly in demand, so to associate them with Nintendo's newest console for their marketing phase is huge. One more third-party announcement. We've already seen most of the notable third-party developers represented, so just about the only thing that could shock me at this point is if we got Bloodborne 2 or something. The Duskbloods? An exclusive FromSoft title for Switch 2? Imagine telling someone in 2015 that not only is Bloodborne still exclusive to the PS4, but its spiritual successor is exclusive to a Nintendo console. This might be the most shocking news of the entire presentation, if I'm being honest. Nintendo has worked with third-party developers for exclusive titles in the past, but never a studio like FromSoft, who in the past has done exclusivity deals with Sony for the most part. This game looks amazing, and an exclusive FromSoft title will certainly draw in an audience that doesn't typically buy Nintendo platforms or play Nintendo games, potentially creating new fans of an existing series. A bold move from both Nintendo and FromSoft, but I'm excited to see how it pans out in 2026. Ah! You guys don't understand. The original Kirby Air Ride on GameCube was a game that defined my childhood. Hours upon hours spent messing around in City Trial and local split screen and jamming out to the amazing soundtrack. This reveal is an absolute dream come true. I never thought we would see it return, directed by Sakurai himself no less. The original Kirby Air Ride always seemed like a stain on Sakurai's record from a critical perspective. Developed in only 6 months, it received middling reviews from critics and only sold about 1.3 million copies. Sakurai's last directed Kirby series title was Air Ride, so returning for a sequel feels like Sakurai is being given the chance to create the title he always wanted to way back when, before being dragged back to Smash Bros. Hell. Our last announcement of the event is the long-rumored return of a platforming king. Originating back to the 1980s, it's the next big 3D adventure of Donkey Kong! Okay, while it may be slightly deflating to still wait on news of a new 3D Mario game after Odyssey, we haven't gotten a Donkey Kong platformer in nearly 11 years at this point, and a 3D DK in 26. I think we can cut the Great Ape some slack. This game looks genuinely incredible too. The premise of being able to smash up any and all terrain is so cool, and it acts as a great showpiece for the Switch 2 hardware as well. The development behind completely destructible terrain is likely no easy task, and probably benefits strongly from the increased horsepower of the Switch 2. I will say, despite how great this game looks, it does feel like it's missing something? Hopefully the more we see of it in the coming months leading up to its release, the better idea we will have of what we're in for. Regardless, it'll be nice to see Donkey Kong back on his feet again on July 17th. And that's all for the Switch 2 Direct. Overall, a pretty fantastic showcase. The hardware is a substantial upgrade over the Nintendo Switch Senior, and we got exciting exclusive announcements, a plethora of third-party support, and game chat for some reason. There's absolutely nothing that could spoil this presentation for me. Well, I mean, maybe if they charge $80 for Mario Kart World or something, but that would be ridiculous. Nintendo isn't that stupid. Maybe it's time I put my faith somewhere else. Yeah, Nintendo really dropped the ball on this one. Immediately after the presentation, we started getting pricing information for a lot of the announced hardware and software. The console itself is $450, $500 for a bundle with Mario Kart World, well within the realm of expectations. I think everyone knew this console would be somewhere between $400 and $500 doubloons. The issue comes with the price of Mario Kart World specifically. While Donkey Kong Bonanza and presumably other Switch 2 AAA games will follow the modern standard of $70 US, Mario Kart World is priced at $80. When asked about the reason behind Mario Kart World's substantially higher pricing, Bill Trinan of Nintendo of America said he would say it's less about the strategy of pricing Mario Kart World, it's more just whenever they look at a given game, they just look at what is the experience and what's the content and what's the value. So they just felt like it. Don't get me wrong, Mario Kart World looks incredible, and I'm sure people will buy it regardless of the price, but I'm not sure the increased profits from World will justify the overwhelming amount of public negativity and backlash deriving from this decision. Part of me believes that the only reason this game was priced at an exceptionally higher price point standalone was to persuade executives into packaging the game with the console as a bundle for only $50 extra. That way they can somewhat offset the revenue lost from the bundle package over time. Bill Trinan also insisted that we would all come to understand the price after the Mario Kart World Direct on April 17th. And Bill Trinan would never lie to us, I'm sure.
A hardware bundle that includes a digital version of Mario Kart World will also be available.
That was the most pointless direct I've ever watched in my entire life. Granted, I spent every waking moment from April 2nd to April 17th watching Treehouse events and in-person invitationals for new footage about this game and other Switch 2 titles, but it just felt like this direct had nothing to it. The only new piece of information this direct really gave us was the return of mission mode from Mario Kart DS in the form of P-Switch missions, and confirmation that battle mode is gonna suck again after it was substantially improved in 8 Deluxe. I don't know, I'm still excited for this game. The new movement mechanics look genuinely monumental for the franchise. But for every step Nintendo takes forward, it feels like they take another 2 backward. Hopefully Nintendo proves me wrong with the game's release. After a grueling 2-month wait, the Nintendo Switch 2 finally launched on June 5th, 2025, and what a special launch it was for me. This was the first console launch I ever got on day 1, and at a midnight release event no less. With both the Nintendo Switch 1 and the PlayStation 5, I decided to order online in hopes that it would arrive on release day, only for it to arrive 2 or 3 painfully long days after launch. I was still excited, for sure, but those first few days were excruciating, waiting for the console to arrive on my doorstep while everyone else already got theirs. I wasn't making that mistake this time, so I ordered my console for pickup at my local Best Buy and got in line around 8 PM to wait for the arrival of Nintendo's next big console launch. My launch haul consisted of the Switch 2 console itself, physical copies of Mario Kart World and Cyberpunk 2077, the Yakuza 0 Director's Cut game keycard, a digital copy of Deltarune, the Switch 2 upgrades for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, as well as the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. A pretty substantial launch haul if I do say so myself. It seems like many others picked up their system as soon as possible as well, because Nintendo confirmed the system sold 3.5 million units within the first 4 days of release, making it the fastest selling system of all time. Unboxing the system, it comes with the console itself, our left and right Joy-Cons, the straps, the Joy-Con grip, the charging kit, an HDMI cable, and the Switch 2 dock. Upon boot up, I was able to transfer over everything from my Switch 1 with little to no issue, and wow, this looks a lot like the Switch 1 menu. The rounded icon edges and colorful highlight outlines are nice, but yeah, this is really the same UI. It's effective, sure, but I can't help but feel like not doing anything to differentiate the UI and internal settings makes it much more difficult to see the Switch 2 as its own generation of hardware, rather than just a Switch 1 Pro, at least from a visual standpoint. It's not the biggest issue. Nintendo uses this limited and basic UI so as to not detract resources from the games themselves, which is definitely the right call. Sure would kill for some themes though. Game chat is also here, and it's exactly what everyone expected. I tried it out once or twice, and it works well. They weren't kidding about the clear audio detection. I imagine that'll make public or portable game chat use much more tolerable than it would be otherwise. Nintendo definitely needed a party system, and I'm glad we have it one way or another, but I personally won't be getting much use out of it. I didn't pick up the Switch 2 camera, but the Switch 2 thankfully supports third-party USB cameras, so I was still able to try it out. It's a camera, alright. As I mentioned prior, I think game chat is a great feature for kids and families who aren't as internet savvy as yours truly, but won't see the widespread adoption that Nintendo was probably hoping for. What will see widespread adoption, however, are the launch games, and Nintendo dropped a plethora of first-party offerings at launch. Mario Kart World, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, the GameCube NSO, the Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, as well as a handful of free Switch 2 updates for popular Switch 1 titles like Super Mario Odyssey and Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. The most notable of these is obviously Mario Kart World, as it was bundled with the system in some SKUs and was the first game revealed for the platform. Personally, I think Mario Kart World was the absolute best choice for a console launch title. Mario Kart 8 is one of the best-selling games ever made. The long-awaited follow-up to the most successful racing game of all time was sure to grab people's attention. I could not be happier with Mario Kart World either. It's such unrestrained and energetic fun. The new movement mechanics turn Mario Kart into the most three-dimensional racing game I've ever played, encouraging players to trick off of and bounce on nearly every surface to discover new routes and shortcuts. The new art direction is so jubilant and joyful, the soundtrack is undoubtedly the greatest celebration of Mario's video game history we've ever seen, and the new mode, Knockout Tour, is incredibly addictive and justifies the transition to open world all by itself. Free roam is super relaxing and teaches the player control over their carts through challenges and collectible hunting, and battle mode is bad again. Oh well, can't win them all. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. The route courses between tracks leave a lot to be desired. They're not nearly as interesting as the traditional 3-lap tracks, and the game really encourages you to play on them. And by encourage, I mean if you dare to try to play a 3-lap race outside of private lobbies in versus mode, Nintendo will straight up fucking kill you. Yeah, Nintendo decided to be really stubborn with this one. There's a substantial lack of customization and options in Mario Kart World. Public online races will be held via route tracks 90% of the time, with no option for a separate queue or mode to play traditional 3-lap tracks only. I understand wanting to push players to interact with the open world and the over 200 route type courses, but there are plenty of ways to do so besides stripping players of choice. Mario Kart World is a flawed game, but I still thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, enough to do a deep dive review on it for over an hour. I think with a handful of content updates and quality of life additions, World could very easily surpass Mario Kart 8 as the best Mario Kart game. The new mechanics and track design are so well done that I already consider World to be the best entry to an extent. I enjoyed it enough to 100% complete it at the very least. Mario Kart World wasn't the only new first-party title, no. We also have the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. We sure do. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you expect. An informational game about the Switch 2 hardware filled with minigames, demonstrations, and quizzes about the history of Nintendo platforms. It's not the most engaging title, and you'll really only get anything out of it if you're a dedicated Nintendo fan or curious about the mechanisms behind the Switch 2 itself. But for a free download, I mean, you might as well. God damn, I keep forgetting they're really charging for this. Yeah, for $10 whole ass, I can't really recommend Switch 2 Welcome Tour. It's got a lot of charm behind it, but it's not really a great game as much as it is an interactive museum. The mouse mode minigames are easily the best part of the package and really show how much could be done with mouse mode in general. Dodge the spike balls, speed maze, speed golf, click quick, and stunt driving were all good fun. Mostly reaction and precision based games, which makes sense given that mouse controls are commonly associated with first person shooters. There are a few exhibits that make use of some of the Switch 2 accessories like the Pro Controller, camera, and a 4K display. I remember people making a big fuss about this, exclaiming, "How dare Nintendo require extra peripherals to get the full Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour experience?" First off, you want the full Switch 2 Welcome Tour experience? Second, of course the game requires extra peripherals for some of the content. The entire point of the game is to demonstrate the Switch 2 hardware, including the additional accessories not included with the system. I understand where the frustration is coming from, given that Nintendo is already charging for what easily could have been the Switch 2's pack-in title, but the outrage surrounding this game and the Switch 2 as a whole was beginning to feel a little performative. People are so focused on sticking it to the man and being angry about games they never intended to play that they end up missing out on great games in the process. Now, is Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour one of those great games? No. But the point is, I think your energy is better spent elsewhere, enjoying games and critiquing things you do care about and want to see improve. The main improvement Switch 2 Welcome Tour can make is not costing $10. Nintendo also launched the Nintendo GameCube Switch Online software today, now rebranded to Nintendo Classics. It only launched with 3 games, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, Soul Calibur 2, and F-Zero GX. While the small number of launch titles is certainly a bummer, we're starting to get to the period where games get much meatier in length. I think it's fair to say you'll get far more time out of these GameCube titles than you can 3 NES or Super Nintendo games, at least playtime-wise. The launch titles showcase a good amount of variety as well, with a critically acclaimed action-adventure game, an exhilarating high-octane racing game, and a cult classic fighting game with GameCube-exclusive content. While neither F-Zero GX nor Soul Calibur 2 is really up my alley, I did give them a try and the emulation quality is excellent. I also gave the Wind Waker a try, and while Zelda is much more my speed, I ended up putting it down in hopes that Wind Waker HD will eventually come to the platform. Surely. The service is not perfect, however, as it unfortunately launched with some input delay, much like the launch of the N64's online emulation service. The N64's emulation was eventually fixed, so hopefully we'll see improvements to the GameCube's emulation quality over time as well. We also saw several improvements to Nintendo Switch 1 titles on launch, most notably full Nintendo Switch 2 editions of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. These cost $10 each, but also come free with a Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pass subscription. These games are improved with the expected features, 4K and HDR support, increased frame rate, better load times, etc. But we also have the addition of Zelda Notes, a new addition to the Nintendo Switch mobile app that allows you to locate voice memories, track your stats, use Waze? F***ing sure, I guess. It feels like Nintendo wanted to charge for the Switch 2 editions of these games because they sold incredibly well, but couldn't figure out what worthwhile content to add, so they ended up just putting quality of life features and lore tidbits on your mobile app and called it a day. I don't know, it feels like they could have implemented these features into the game itself for a more complete experience, but hey, at least the performance enhancements are stellar and don't need to be launched through a separate application on a new menu. That would be ridiculous. We also got a few free updates for a couple core and casual titles, namely Super Mario Odyssey and 3D World, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and the Grezzo Zelda games. Mostly 4K and HDR support and a few performance increases, specifically for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and would you look at that, the games are playable now. Still butt ugly art direction wise, but at least the frame rate doesn't induce nausea anymore. You really shouldn't have taken 3 years and a new console generation to see these improvements, but beggars can't be choosers, I guess. A number of games also got game share support, easily Switch 2's most underrated feature. Being able to stream these Switch 1 games locally and online with friends is such a consumer-friendly move from Nintendo that I honestly didn't believe it at first. And the ability to play Switch 2 games on Switch 1 via game share is such a welcome addition as well. Third-party wise, I spent a lot of time with Deltarune this month. Is it too early to say that I think Deltarune is substantially better than Undertale? Don't get me wrong, Undertale is fantastic, but the narrative and characters in Deltarune are so strong with an intriguing mystery that's keeping me on edge. The music is fantastic as per usual, but it's Toby Fox, so that was a given. Something about the structure of Deltarune with the lighteners and darkeners, the prophecy, the weird root, it's also investing. Each chapter has a unique vibe with different characters and environments to explore, secrets to discover. My personal favorite was Chapter 2. Queen was just too damn funny. Deltarune is releasing in an episodic structure, with this paid release containing the first 4 chapters after the first 2 chapters were made available as a free demo a couple years back. We should be getting new chapters once a year for a little while, so I'm excited to see where the story picks up from here. Cyberpunk 2077 and Yakuza 0 Director's Cut were my 2 mature audience pickups this month, both for different reasons. Cyberpunk 2077 was available physically fully on the cartridge and offered cross-save support, so I was able to pick up my PlayStation save from where I left off and start chipping away at the Phantom Liberty DLC as it's included with the Ultimate Edition on Switch 2. I haven't spent too much time with this one, but my main takeaway from my time with Cyberpunk is that CD Projekt Red are wizards. I remember when Cyberpunk first launched back in December of 2020 and it was a complete mess. The game was basically non-functional on last-gen platforms, and performance was rough on next-gen and PC. Fast forward to 2026, and not only have those versions been substantially improved, but we have a portable Nintendo Switch 2 version with all the bells and whistles of the other console releases like ray tracing. We have both quality and performance modes, with quality running at a locked 30 FPS with sharper image quality and performance running at 40 FPS with a slightly less clear image, but both are fine ways to play. It truly is impressive how CD Projekt Red managed to turn this one around. And I'm glad they decided to support the Switch 2 so early into its lifespan. I also picked up Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, my first and only game key card. I suppose now would be a good time to address the elephant in the room, game key cards. Game key cards are cartridges you put in your system and use as an access key to install the full game from the internet, rather than the data being on the game card itself. Game key cards are cartridges you put in your system and use as an access key to install the full game from the internet, rather than the game data being on the card itself like on Switch 1 and other platforms. Game key cards are Nintendo's way of offering a retail presence to companies that can't fit their larger games onto a 64GB cartridge, or just don't feel like spending the money on a true physical cartridge. It's mostly the second one, honestly. Publishers will do anything to increase their profit margins, even if that means skimping out on a true physical release for their consumers. I've made an entire video about why I dislike these cards so much, and why I think they're a bad sign for video game preservation and ownership as a whole. I bought Yakuza 0 at the Switch 2's launch kinda last minute, as I only decided to pick the game up when I went to the launch event itself and saw it on the shelf. And yeah, it still feels kinda gross supporting this practice, and I haven't bought one since. Hopefully we'll see more true physicals in the future as Nintendo begins to offer more, cheaper storage cards, but I'm not holding my breath. Unless it starts drastically affecting sales, I can't imagine stubborn publishers like Square Enix and Atlus going the extra mile to put their games on a real physical, even if it would appease a notable group of customers. Regardless of the format, Yakuza 0 is a good time on Switch 2. It would feel like a bigger deal if Yakuza Kiwami didn't just get a Switch port a few months back, but it's still nice to see this franchise on a Nintendo platform, especially after there were doubts the series would ever come to Switch considering the Switch's younger and more casual player base. Playing this game on Switch 2, however, just feels right. The core gameplay structure feels right at home with the Switch 2's hybrid nature, taking on side quests and minigames in handheld mode by day, and completing big story brawls and climactic moments docked on the big screen. I do think I'm personally more of a Yakuza RPG guy. I loved Yakuza 7 and 8, so hopefully we see those entries on the Switch 2 down the line as well. I miss my boy Ichiban. Sega put out a lot of support for the Switch 2 during its launch, as alongside Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, we also had a Switch 2 version of Sonic X Shadow Generations, the latest entry in the franchise. I actually picked this one up on sale later down the line, mainly because I already had a physical Switch 1 copy and Sega didn't offer an upgrade path. If you already own the Switch 1 version, you'll have to pay full price to get the Switch 2 benefits. Pretty scummy of them to go this route, but Sonic Generations is one of my favorite games of all time, so a high quality portable version of this game was too good to pass up on sale later on. The Sonic Generations portion of this package is pretty great. It was already serviceable on Switch 1, but with a dock performance of 1440p 60 FPS and 1080p handheld, this will probably be my primary way of playing the game from here on out. Sonic Generations is such a replayable and endlessly enjoyable experience. The way Sonic controls feels like the perfected version of the boost formula, and running through remixed highlight stages from Sonic's entire history up to that point will never not be a spectacle. Unfortunately, this is where my praises fall short, as the Shadow Generations portion of this package does not hold up nearly as well. 1080p 30 FPS in quality and 720p 60 FPS in performance. That is ridiculous. The Switch 2 is more than capable of running the game at a bare minimum 1080-60, so to see the game shipped in this state is nothing more than insulting. The game also looks very blurry in performance mode, with the artifacting and poor anti-aliasing being very distracting at times. It's still Shadow Generations, the game itself is great, one of Sonic Team's best releases in years. But I don't find myself revisiting Shadow Generations as often as I do Sonic due to the obvious cut corners in this version. It's very clear that this was a rush job port, made to capitalize on the Switch 2 launch hype, and I'm disappointed that Sega put so little effort into this version of the game and then forced their customers to pay a premium for it. Not a great look. Oh yeah, I also put a few hours into Fortnite. I mostly play this game on PC with friends, but running a few games on Switch 2, I was surprised just by how competent this release is. Fortnite on Switch 1 was definitely playable at launch, but as the updates kept coming and the Switch continued to show its age, the cracks started to show. The game was near unplayable at points with constant frame dips and pop-in issues. Thankfully, the Switch 2 version is much more competent, running at a buttery smooth 1080-60 with little to no dips. The mouse mode functionality is very well implemented, and it's honestly my preferred way to play this game on Switch 2. It took some getting used to with the smaller form factor and all, but I honestly feel I could say the Switch 2 has the best Fortnite console experience just by virtue of having a built-in mouse substitute. Those were all the games I played around launch, but there were plenty of other launch titles to keep you busy as well. Bravely Default HD, Fast Fusion, No Man's Sky, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S, Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, Split Fiction, Street Fighter 6, and more. If those were somehow not enough to keep you interested, however, it wouldn't be long before more news came your way. On June 10th, we learned via the Nintendo Today app of both Switch 2 enhancements for Splatoon 3 releasing on the 12th, as well as the existence of Splatoon Raiders, an upcoming Splatoon single-player spin-off releasing exclusively on the Switch 2 sometime in the future. It's about time the Splatoon franchise began expanding into spin-offs. It already developed an incredibly vast and dedicated following, so experimenting with new gameplay formulas and formats is sure to be exciting. The last major event of this month was a dedicated direct for Donkey Kong Bonanza on June 18th. The initial trailer for Donkey Kong Bonanza was good, but I still needed a bit more convincing before I truly accepted this as Nintendo's next big 3D platformer. Whereas the Mario Kart World Direct underdelivered, the Donkey Kong Bonanza Direct exceeded my expectations, revealing that a young Pauline was tagging along with DK on this underground adventure, along with new animal transformations, Kong, Zebra, and Ostrich Bonanzas. I think this showcase was exactly what people needed to get truly excited for DK Bonanza. This isn't just a new 3D Donkey Kong. It is Nintendo EPD8's next big title, a studio at Nintendo that is famous for its consistent output of Game of the Year level titles, for pushing the boundaries of what's possible in 3D platformers. While Donkey Kong may be a new avenue for them, I think it's fair to expect the usual level of quality. July continued the pace set by June with a few first-party titles, specifically Donkey Kong Bonanza and Super Mario Party Jamboree, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Jamboree TV. God, I still f***ing hate that title. But first, we got our first GameCube Switch Online update with Super Mario Strikers launching on July 3rd. I had never played a Strikers game before this one, so I'm glad I got to try it out. It supports a 16:9 ratio like F-Zero GX, which is much appreciated, and is a great title for online multiplayer. I hope to see Mario Power Tennis in the future, as that was always my favorite Mario sports game. I think it should come soon, as long as we don't get a new Mario Tennis entry that would conflict with that release marketing-wise. I mean, we still haven't got a new Mario Baseball, so it should still be a few years till we see tennis again. Things were quiet from here on out until things got loud with the full release of Donkey Kong Bonanza on July 17th. And man, did this game leave an impact. Fantastic scores across the board, near unanimous public praise from fans, and an exciting take on the 3D platforming genre that only Donkey Kong could achieve. Like Super Mario Odyssey, Donkey Kong Bonanza's addictive gameplay loop owes its success to the smooth flow of Donkey Kong's movement mechanics. Rolling, diving, punching, and climbing, each action transitions seamlessly to the next, making Donkey Kong a joy to control. I had a couple of concerns that the ability to destroy nearly any and all terrain would bog down the level design and make platforming less engaging, but no. I personally enjoyed the Lagoon layer and Tempest layers the most. Their verticality and varied sublayers were a joy to explore. Nearly every area is designed with DK's destructive habits in mind, encouraging the player to use his kit in inventive ways. For example, some platforms can only be created by tossing chunks of terrain into them, and unclimbable walls that can only be overcome by using your momentum or a chunk jump. The art direction is incredibly colorful and jubilant. Each layer has its own identity, gameplay gimmicks, and terrain types to keep things fresh. Bonanza also managed to solve the Mario Odyssey Too Many Moons crisis by giving you a skill tree to expand DK's moveset, using points you earn from collecting Bonandian gems, rewarding the player for going off the beaten path to grab collectibles and solve puzzles. There are also fossils to collect, which you can spend to unlock cosmetic costumes for DK and Pauline. These costumes and fur dye can also provide buffs and abilities like increasing collectible spawn rates or making you immune to certain terrain. They also make it even more confusing as to why Donkey Kong and Pauline don't have that many costumes in Mario Kart World. My only real gripe with the game is that many of the bosses are somewhat lacking. There are a couple of good ones, but many of them can be trivialized really easily by just being aggressive with your abilities. I feel like I missed a couple of cool moments and enemy attack patterns by defeating them within a minute. The boss fights against Void Kong also suffer from a really bogged down frame rate, which doesn't seem to be an issue anywhere else in the game. These issues weren't enough to stop me from achieving 100% completion, however. Collecting every banana, fossil, costume, and music disc was an absolute blast. Overall, Donkey Kong Bonanza was an experiment from the 3D Mario team, and they knocked it out of the park, expanding the horizons for one of Nintendo's oldest mascots for the first time in decades. The Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Party Jamboree fucking blows. On July 24th, 2025, Nintendo released their first post-launch Switch 2 edition, Super Mario Party Jamboree, Nintendo Switch 2 edition, plus Jamboree TV, which I will henceforth be referring to as just Jamboree TV for my own sanity. Jamboree TV is without a doubt the worst Switch 2 edition in my opinion. Super Mario Party Jamboree on its own was a fantastic entry in the Mario Party series, one of the best entries in years, especially as a follow-up to the mediocrity that was Super Mario Party as a new mainline entry. And Jamboree TV adds to the core package with an abundance of new minigames and modes. The new minigames all focus on the mouse controls, utilizing a new control scheme in interesting ways, like using the precision drag and drop of a mouse in Shuffle Stacker, or building up tension and propelling forward toy cars in Pullback Attack. These new minigames are solid, and a no-brainer addition to a game like this. There's also the new Bowser Live mode, where you have 6 minigames based on utilizing the camera and mic functionalities of the Switch 2. These minigames are kinda novel on a first playthrough, but are substantially less fun than the actual main modes. Now, as all Switch 2 editions do, Jamboree TV saw some performance enhancements, namely 4K support in dock, 1080p support in handheld, and more stable performance across the board. On paper, this all sounds great. In execution, however, I have to wonder just what the actual they were thinking with this one. Upon booting up the game, you're met with a new main menu with 3 options. First, you have Super Mario Party Jamboree, the Switch 1 game in its entirety, with all the extra modes and none of the Switch 2 editions or enhancements. Next is Jamboree TV, the Switch 2 edition of the game with just the new additions and the main party mode. None of the additional modes, campaign, the Koopathlon, etc. Why? Why would you release the game in this state? With none of the enhancements actually applied to the original title, just attaches a homunculus new mode with less than half the original content and no online compatibility between Switch 1 and 2 users? This Switch 2 enhancement feels entirely underbaked and honestly puts a stain on what is otherwise a great party game. Thankfully, as a bit of a palate cleanser, a few days later on the 28th, Nintendo dropped Mario Paint on Switch Online with mouse support. I'm glad the Switch 2's new features, like mouse controls and mic support, have enabled them to do releases of games that otherwise would not natively function on Switch 2 without some wonky workarounds. Mario Paint is a pretty iconic title in the Super Nintendo library, and it's neat to see it fully supported on this generation of Nintendo hardware. This month was a bit slower third-party wise, as most of the companies kind of blew their load at the Switch 2's launch lineup, but we still had a few notable releases like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3+4, WWE 2K25, Wild Hearts S, Shadow Labyrinth Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, and Dear Me I Was. It wouldn't be long until we heard more about upcoming third-party releases, as we had a Nintendo's Direct partner showcase on July 31st. There were some big names here: Monster Hunter Stories 3, Twisted Reflection, Pac-Man World 2 Repack, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Wow, how did they get that running on Switch 1? Persona 3 Reload, Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2, Borderlands 4, can't wait for that to release on time and not get indefinitely delayed. Octopath Traveler 0, Apex Legends, Chronos the New Dawn. There were no shortage of things to be excited for. It's great to see such a plethora of third-party developers jump on the Switch 2 train so early in its life, especially after how middling support was for the Switch 1 in its first couple of months. Just a little over a month after launch, we see our next Switch 2 sales update on August 1st, with a reported 5.82 million hardware units sold and 8.67 million software units sold. Not bad, not bad. About 2 million new users in the Switch 2 ecosystem, no doubt encouraged by the back-to-back combo of Mario Kart and 3D Donkey Kong. I wonder what first-party Nintendo title is releasing next to continue that success. Oh. Drag X Drive officially launches on August 15th, and it is the same soulless husk we saw in the Switch 2 presentation back in April. I gave the open network test a whirl because God forbid I spend $20 on this, and I have to say, this game can actually be pretty fun for an hour or so. Getting accustomed to moving your wheelchair and learning to pivot and balance on one wheel for extra height is challenging but rewarding. The few matches I played were fun. It felt cathartic to speed up the court ramps and do a triple chair spin into a dunk for a buzzer beater finish, but the charm wears off fast. I can't help but wonder why Nintendo went with such a generic art direction for this game. Drag X Drive feels like the kind of toy-esque title that only Nintendo would make, so for it to fall into the generic blandness pitfall that is typically common of other AAA publishers is strange. I'm aware the game has a few additional minigames, stuff like Circuit Sprint, Rebound Scramble, and later on Survival Tag, as well as some customization options for your character with alternate model sizes and colors, but nothing that salvages the game's milquetoast art direction and general gameplay loop. I feel conflicted. There's certainly fun to be had here, but as Nintendo's showcase of a main Switch 2 gimmick with a $20 barrier to entry, I think there are far better ways to get the most out of your new system. We had a couple of presentations this month, namely an Indie World on August 7th, and our first look at Kirby Air Riders in the Kirby Air Riders Direct on August 19th. And wow. I was already excited for this game, but this presentation sealed the deal. This looks like an incredible follow-up to the 2003 original, with more playable characters, new kart types, gorgeous tracks, an expansive new city trial map, new stadium events, and so much more. You can see that a lot of the game's UI and core structure is similar to that of Smash Ultimate, which makes sense. It's not the first time Sakurai's development philosophy and gameplay ideas have bled over from project to project, like how Kid Icarus Uprising basically copied the menu design from Smash Bros. Brawl, and how Smash for 3DS's Smash Run mode utilizes the same basic gameplay loop as Kirby Air Ride City Trial. With an exploration period you spend collecting stat boosts on a large open map before a match or minigame at the end of a time limit. These games share a lot of the same DNA, and if their quality is anything to go by, Kirby Air Riders is expected to be an incredible comeback for Kirby's racing subseries, releasing on November 20th. Kirby also saw the release of a Switch 2 edition of his own this month, with Kirby and the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 edition plus Star-Crossed World, releasing on August 28th. Kirby and the Forgotten Land was already one of the Switch's best titles. As Kirby's first full foray into the 3D platforming genre, HAL Labs absolutely nailed it. And unsurprisingly, the Switch 2 edition is a welcome addition to the package. Star-Crossed World both enhances the resolution from 1080 to 1440p and doubles the frame rate from 30 to 60 FPS, as well as provides an entirely new mini-campaign along the main adventure. This short adventure spans 12 levels and takes you through each of the game's main worlds with a remixed stage from the base game as the opener before transitioning or expanding into a newly discovered area. Oceans split open and freeze over, new coaster routes appear and tower over the abandoned theme park. There's plenty left to explore beneath the surface of Kirby's latest adventure. These levels also feature a few brand new mouthful modes, Spring, Gear, and Sign Mouth. Spring Mouth brings extensive verticality to some levels, allowing you to bounce up high and smash downward to break crystals and defeat enemies. Gear Mouth allows you to attach to walls and other surfaces to complete puzzles and traverse new terrain. Sign Mouth sends you flying downhill in an auto-running section where you'll need to react to enemies and platforms quickly to access collectibles. All three are great additions to Kirby's mouthful arsenal. I only wish there were a few more opportunities to use them. This expansion's biggest sin is that it's only a few hours long, with 100% completion only requiring 3 to 5 hours of gameplay. To be fair, I do think Kirby games benefit from being highly replayable experiences, but for a $20 expansion, I do think a bit more content was fair to expect. I would be remiss not to mention the excellent soundtrack of Star-Crossed World as well, with tracks like Meteoric Beast Battle, Fallen Star Beach, Frost Street Snow Park, and Moonlight Canyon Labyrinth being incredibly catchy and atmospheric tunes, fitting the glistening and starry atmosphere of this expansion. Lost in a Live Mall is a standout track composed by Shogo Sakai, who also composed for Mother 3, and you can certainly tell. The song is easily one of my favorites. If you haven't already played Kirby in the Forgotten Land or just want more of it, the Switch 2 edition plus Starcross World is a worthy upgrade with some bells and whistles that sweeten the deal that much more. August was a pretty slow month aside from our core Nintendo releases, with really only Apex Legends and Madden NFL 26 to satisfy that casual gaming market. We had Chibi Robo released on Switch Online on August 21st, which wasn't on the list of currently announced games. I think Nintendo just wanted to continue the trend of not advertising Chibi Robo releases. September was the first month Nintendo really decided to step back and let third parties handle things, with no notable first-party releases of their own. But they did satiate fans with a Nintendo Direct on September 12th, the first general Switch 2 Direct post-launch. Starting strong with a bunch of Mario franchise announcements to celebrate the 40th anniversary, the Super Mario Galaxy movie was officially revealed, along with some new amiibo figures and ports of Super Mario Galaxy 1 and Super Mario Galaxy 2. Now all 3 games from the 3D All-Stars collection will be officially available on Switch in some capacity again, as well as Galaxy 2 for the first time. They then announced the next Mario Tennis game, Mario Tennis Fever, after everyone kept asking for a new Mario Baseball. A Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Bros. Wonder is next, with the addition of Meet Up in Bellabelle Park, an expansion focused on adding new local and online multiplayer modes. They close out the anniversary announcements with the reveal of Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, a new mainline Yoshi game with an absolutely gorgeous painted art style. Aside from the Galaxy ports, it does feel like none of these games were actually made to celebrate Mario's 40th anniversary, and just happened to be finishing development during the general timeline of this event. Not necessarily a bad thing, but after the expectation that was set with the 30th and 35th anniversary celebrations, I think it was fair to be slightly underwhelmed. A few highlights up next. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade is finally dated for release on Switch 2 on January 22nd, 2026, looking great. Hades 2 comes to Switch and Switch 2 as a timed console exclusive on September 25th digitally and November 20th physically. Kirby Air Riders gets a few amiibo announced with a swappable rider and machine gimmick, and Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment gets a new trailer where it's finally dated for November 6th. Dragon Quest VII is revealed to be receiving a full-blown remake, and while the art style isn't really my favorite, I saw a lot of excitement from Dragon Quest fans. Not even a year after GameCube was added to Nintendo Switch Online, Nintendo announced that the Virtual Boy will be coming to NSO next. It will be fun to watch this console fail for a second time. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly is receiving a remake of its own, Stardew Valley, Overcooked 2, and Human Fall Flat are all receiving Nintendo Switch 2 editions, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is finally dated for December 4th. A bit beyond the traditional holiday window. Maybe they just needed a few extra weeks to go gold, but the game is looking incredible visually. The trailer revealed that Samus will need to travel region to region on the Viola bike in a semi-open area desert, a first for the series. Metroid is traditionally about exploring dense, vertically expanding locations, so a wide open desert with what seems to be not that many hazards is not the direction I expected them to lean into. I'm open to the idea, I just need to try it for myself to be fully convinced, I think. Up next, Donkey Kong Bonanza gets a DLC expansion, DK Island and Emerald Rush. A new layer to explore in the entire roguelike mode is quite the expansion, so I'm looking forward to trying it for myself when it launches later today. Straight after this, we receive a bunch of Pokemon news, starting with a new spin-off entry, Pokemon Pokopia. Pokopia seems to be Pokemon's take on the Animal Crossing and Dragon Quest Builders formula, a fitting blend of titles given Pokemon's larger casual audience. Pokemon Legends ZA showcases some new Mega Evolutions for the Kalos starters and reveals that the game will be getting a DLC expansion post-launch, Pokemon Legends ZA Mega Dimension. It feels a bit scummy to reveal a DLC expansion before the game's on launch. I think whatever content this is could have easily been added as an expanded post-game for the base release. A few more highlights, Danganronpa 2x2, Dynasty Warriors Origins, Little Nightmares 3, and Resident Evil Requiem, with Resident Evil Requiem launching day and date with the other platforms alongside Switch 2 ports of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard and Resident Evil Village. Capcom has been the MVP of Switch 2 third-party support so far. They have been all in with the amount of ports and collaborations they've been doing with Nintendo. Lastly, we see the reveal of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, the next mainline Fire Emblem game after Engage, set in the same universe as Fire Emblem Three Houses. This is easily one of my most anticipated titles of 2026. While I enjoyed my time with Engage and certainly loved the art direction and music, I generally preferred the tone and characters of Three Houses and previous Fire Emblems. Overall, I think this was a pretty stacked direct. I think a popular heavy hitter like a 3D Zelda remake or a 3D Mario reveal would have sealed the deal for more casual fans, but for me, there's way too much stuff on the horizon to be excited about. Following the direct, I picked up the Donkey Kong Bonanza expansion, DK Island and Emerald Rush for only 20 bones. A little on the pricier side for how much new content is added, but I still thoroughly enjoyed this DLC. DK Island is fun to explore, but I wish there were new bananas and objectives to complete outside of Emerald Rush, akin to Mario Odyssey's Mushroom Kingdom. I think there's more than enough post-game content in DK Bonanza, so this DLC doesn't feel like cut content, but I do wish we got a bit more traditional collectathon editions in DK Island, rather than just being a hub and tutorial for Emerald Rush. Emerald Rush on its own is a pretty sizable piece of DLC, adding a new roguelite mode that can add countless hours to your playtime. Emerald Rush has you working for Void Kong, collecting bananas and fossils, completing bounties, and doing miscellaneous tasks to earn emerald gems and increase your multipliers to hit the increasing bounty threshold each round. This mode is available across the majority of the game's layers and adds a ton of replayability to DK Bonanza in a way that just wasn't possible in the base game. While I do still believe the entry price is a little higher than needed, I feel as though I more than got my money's worth with the time I spent in the Emerald Mines. That was Nintendo's only major release this month, as in a few weeks we'll be entering the holiday season and receiving a new major AAA title every half month or so. Thankfully, there were plenty of third-party titles to play this month. Hollow Knight Silksong finally released to critical acclaim, Hades 2 launched as a time console exclusive on Switch and Switch 2, Star Wars Outlaws was a surprisingly good port, Chronos The New Dawn appealed to the core horror audience, NBA 2K26 drew in the casual crowd, and Daemon X Machina Titanic Sian was there too. I picked up a few titles this month, notably Trails in the Sky First Chapter, Pac-Man World 2 Repack, and Final Fantasy Tactics The Evilest Chronicles. I have yet to dive into FF Tactics, but both Trails and Repack were a great time. Trails in the Sky First Chapter was my first foray into the Trails series, and I was not disappointed. This adventure was jovial and lighthearted with great music and dynamic action combat. I love being able to clear hordes of weaker enemies for small bursts of EXP using action combat and taking on larger foes in quest events with traditional RPG pacing. Systems like this feel like they respect the player's time by giving them options to clear battles more efficiently and for greater rewards. Pac-Man World 2 Repack gave me a chance to finally complete a childhood title of mine. I remember playing Pac-Man World 2 on GameCube a ton growing up, but I never got past the first world or two. Returning to it now, I finally got to conquer this former adversary of mine. It was a good time. Not like revolutionary or anything, but a solid and charming 3D platformer for a pretty cheap price will always be on my radar. October is the month where Pokemon Legends ZA was finally released, and you know what that means. Everybody is fucking pissed. Released on October 16th, Legends ZA was released to somewhat mixed reception, with some focused on praising the new active combat system and others prioritizing lambasting the poor art direction. What do I think? Well, despite it not looking visually the greatest, I honestly think this might be one of my favorite Pokemon games ever? Okay, first, let me clarify. I am not the world's biggest Pokemon fan. I play the games, I enjoy a few of the spin-offs, but this isn't a high priority franchise for me. It's funny being on the other side. I remember being confused when Legends Arceus came out and received far greater praise when I kinda thought it looked much rougher visually and was a little boring. The setting and atmosphere didn't really appeal to me, and I thought the music was underwhelming. Exploring Hisui just wasn't exciting. The open areas were varied, sure, but none of them really had interesting set pieces or much density. They were all just open fields. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but Legends ZA fixes a lot of the issues I had with Arceus and appeals much more to my interest as a Pokemon fan. Kalos was always a region I enjoyed exploring, and the transition from multiple barren maps to one densely packed city made exploration much more enticing for me. The music is especially standout, with tons of energetic and eccentric battle themes as well as cozy city songs. The return of Mega Evolution is a plus. I've always felt like it was the best gimmick, gameplay and presentation-wise. Z-moves, Gigantamaxing, and Terrestrialization, none of them hold a candle to Mega Evolution. Entering a trainer battle and watching their battle intro was always a treat, each one uniquely expressing the character's personality. The Rogue Mega Evolution battles are a fun spin on the traditional battle formula, putting you in somewhat of an endurance match against a rampaging Pokemon where both you and your Pokemon need to remain active and dodge attacks. Traditional battles are more engaging as well. Utilizing the new active combat system, I feel more engaged in each battle. I'm not just giving commands to my Mons, I'm positioning them to dodge attacks and use AoE attacks. Putting moves on cooldowns prevents me from spamming my strongest attack and incentivizes me to build Mons with quicker and more varied moves. Part of me feels like I enjoy this system so much because it reminds me of Xenoblade combat, but that's a good thing. While I stand by what I said, I do think this is one of my favorite Pokemon entries. That doesn't mean I can't see the very obvious flaws in its presentation. This game looks rough. This game can look incredibly sterile in its environments and art direction outside of character and Pokemon models. Buildings and surfaces are covered in flat textures with little to no depth. Plenty of animations are janky and unpolished. And this game is not a looker by any means. It feels especially disappointing because we've seen the leaked beta documents for this game. Those buildings used to have open windows, decks, terraces, and foliage. They used to be so much more detailed and fun to look at. I guess somewhere in development they realized the Switch 1 just wasn't capable of performing at a sufficient quality with these features, but why not restore them for the Switch 2 edition? Especially if you were going to charge an additional $10 for this version with no noticeable differences outside the resolution and performance enhancements. There's also the issue of them locking certain Mega Evolution Stones behind online battling. They're not exactly hard to get, you only need to hit rank S on your way from Z to A, which can take anywhere from 2 to 4 matches depending on your luck. But I don't think paywalling this content behind an online subscription was the right choice to make. Despite my issues, Pokemon Legends ZA is the most engaged I've been with a Pokemon title in a long time. It's the first Pokemon game I've ever completed the Pokédex for. The first one I've attempted to hunt shinies in. I wanted to do and see everything in this game. I even collected every single one of Kanari's screws hidden around Lumiose. I didn't need to do that. I just got a big stupid Kanari plush for doing so. I love Pokemon Legends ZA, and I hope we see more implementation of its active battle system in future Pokemon entries, hopefully with more appealing environmental art direction. Following ZA's launch, we got a couple small news updates from Nintendo. Kirby Air Riders got a second direct on October 23rd, revealing the road trip campaign mode and the return of Top Ride. On October 29th, Capcom announced Resident Evil Requiem was receiving a special edition Nintendo Switch 2 Pro Controller and Amiibo. On October 30th, Luigi's Mansion dropped on NSO just in time for Halloween, and Animal Crossing New Horizons has a Nintendo Switch 2 version and a 3.0 update announced to be released on January 15th, 2026. Pikmin 4 also got an update this month, 2 years after release. Not a Switch 2 update or anything, no, just content for the Switch 1 game with no resolution or performance enhancements anywhere in sight. Sure, whatever. We had a few notable third-party releases this month as well, namely Yooka-Ri Playly, Little Nightmares 3, Persona 3 Reload, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake, and Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. Yooka-Ri Playly and Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection were both true physicals, thankfully. Both games had their digital release in October and a physical release in December, unfortunately not without some caveats. Yooka-Ri Playly runs at 30 FPS, making it pretty easily the worst version of this remake, even compared to the Steam Deck, which is capable of running this game at a solid 60. It just seems odd to me. As a mascot 3D platformer, you'd expect this game would be right at home with Nintendo audiences, and thus have extra effort to ensure this port is as close to the PS5 and Series X versions as possible. But no. Hopefully down the line we see some performance updates, as Playtonic has said they're exploring the idea, but until that patch rolls around, I can't see myself putting much time into this one. Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, unfortunately, was also a bit lacking on Switch 2. It had issues at launch with poor matchmaking, which has since been resolved. However, what can't be patched is that the Switch 2 physical of this game doesn't include Mortal Kombat 4 on the cartridge. The PS5 and Series X versions of this game have Mortal Kombat 4 on the disc, but the Switch 2 cartridge doesn't, as according to Digital Eclipse, the Switch 2 build had to be submitted before Mortal Kombat 4 was ready, and thus didn't make it in time. So just delay the physical release. The physical release of this game was already released 2 months after its digital release. Having to wait an extra month or two for a Switch 2 physical to be complete on the cartridge would have been no problem. You're already going the extra mile by committing to a true physical and not a keycard, so why shoot yourself in the foot by requiring a day one download to play a sizable chunk of the collection? You have to know the type of consumers you're appealing to by going the true physical route. The whole idea is to have the game data on the cartridge. All of it. I still want to commend and support these developers for not cheaping out and putting their games on keycards, but I also hope in the future they spend more time polishing these releases so the full game on the card is actually of the highest quality it can be. Overall, not a bad month for the Switch 2 by any means, but things really began to kick into high gear next month. Starting things off strong, on November 4th, Nintendo released its second quarterly financial report, revealing that the Nintendo Switch 2 has sold 10.36 million hardware units and 20.62 million software units. The Switch 2 selling nearly 10 million units in its first 4 months on the market is crazy impressive, but it does beg the question if Nintendo can keep this momentum up through the holidays. We'll have to wait just a few more months to truly determine if Switch 2 sales are consistently great or just front-loaded from launch. Just 3 weeks after the launch of Pokemon Legends ZA, on November 6th, Nintendo and Koei Tecmo released the third entry in the Hyrule Warriors series, Hyrule Warriors: Age of Imprisonment. Age of Imprisonment acts as a pseudo-prequel to Tears of the Kingdom, the same way that Age of Calamity did back in 2020. Unlike Age of Calamity, however, Age of Imprisonment is a completely canon prequel. No time travel, no alternate endings, just the truth of what occurred when Zelda was sent to Hyrule's past. The past two Hyrule Warriors games were non-canon fanservice fests, and while I do certainly enjoy those as a fan of the Zelda series, I also enjoyed this new approach to the story structure in Age of Imprisonment. We finally got real characterization and names for the four sages of the past: Agriston the Goron, Kia the Zora, Rafika the Rito, and Artie the Gerudo. Exploring these four characters along with Rauru, Sonia, and Mineru was what I wanted most from this game, and while it didn't go to the extent I hoped it would, I still thoroughly enjoyed the tone set by this game. The addition of Kalamo and the mysterious construct brings a lot of mystery and intrigue to the game, and the splitting story into two parallel campaigns for the first half was a fun idea to explore. These two also brought along new Star Fox-like rail shooter segments, and while there aren't many, they're a good spice of variety to freshen up your adventure from time to time. This game also looks great visually. The WoW era art style is finally reaching its fullest potential on Nintendo Switch 2, with better resolution and more stable frame rates. The gameplay is also largely improved from previous entries, with the cinematic sync strikes between combatants and a rock-paper-scissors-like elemental weapons mechanic based on the Zonai constructs from Tears of the Kingdom. Unfortunately, that's mostly where my praises end, as I think Age of Imprisonment is the least enjoyable Hyrule Warriors gameplay-wise, mostly due to the linear map design and mission structure. Previous Hyrule Warriors games had you tackle dense maps with twisty paths and varying objectives, whereas Age of Imprisonment mostly sends you on a to B linear romp where you mow down a few enemies in your path and that's it. It's not the worst thing in the world, I still enjoyed the game enough to achieve 100% completion, but I do think this entry was a step down in terms of general map design. The roster also leaves a bit to be desired, as more than half of them are completely original characters unlocked from doing side missions, each pair representing a different species in Hyrule. I found a lot of them really fun to play as, like the Gerudo Sholani and Ronza, but I found it difficult to be invested in them as characters since they had so little relation to the larger narrative. In previous entries, side characters were at the very least recognizable from appearances in other games, but in Age of Imprisonment I found myself sticking to those I both recognized and enjoyed playing as, like Kia, Artie, and the Mysterious Construct. Age of Imprisonment certainly isn't a bad game by any stretch. It still has great music and a story worth experiencing, but if Nintendo announced that Age of Calamity or the original Hyrule Warriors was receiving a Switch 2 patch, I think I would find myself revisiting those entries more than I would this one. On November 11th, we received some troubling news. Pokemon Pokopia will be launching worldwide as a game keycard rather than a traditional physical cartridge. This is the first Nintendo published title to do so, and it doesn't bode well for the future of physical media on Nintendo platforms. Up to this point, Nintendo has guaranteed their games will be published entirely on cartridges, and while Pokopia is a collaboration between Nintendo, the Pokemon Company, and Koei Tecmo, it's disappointing that they decided to go this route and for full price no less. I won't act like they lost a sale here, as I really wasn't that interested in this title to begin with, but I did plan on giving it a fair shot down the line if I could find it on sale or secondhand. I would say that I hope sales reflect some consumers' dismay with game keycards, but it's Pokemon, so I'm sure this game will sell like crazy. Hopefully this is a one-time thing, rather than Nintendo testing the water for future first-party keycard releases. It wasn't all doom and gloom for long, as on November 20th, Kirby Air Riders released worldwide, and oh my god, it's incredible. I always knew I was gonna like Air Riders. I grew up with the original and I'm nostalgic for that period of my life, yada yada yada, but I can't exaggerate just how unfathomably good this game is. This just might be one of the richest and most content-complete games Nintendo has ever released. Every single aspect of the original game has been improved several times over. The art direction is joyful and full of life, the music is incredibly catchy, I could go on. A lot of reviews cited the controls as a negative aspect of the game, calling them confusing and unintuitive, which is very funny considering the premise of Air Riders is that it really only uses one button. Your vehicle moves automatically and you can hold A to brake and drift around corners, press A in the air to fast fall, get near enemies to attack and use copy abilities on them, and press B to use your special. It really is that simple. I don't think the review scores for this game reflect its quality at all. An 82 on OpenCritic is nothing to scoff at by any means, but I honestly think this game deserves far greater recognition. Air Riders is divided into 4 main modes. Air Ride is traditional races on one of 18 courses, 9 new and 9 classic, as one of 21 characters with different stats and racing abilities, and using one of 21 main vehicles of varying types and gimmicks. Each character has their own special ability, some allowing you to attack other players, drop traps on the track, give you a huge speed boost, and more. Every vehicle is completely different from one another, not just in stats, but in mechanics. There are stars like the Paper Star and Wing Star which excel at flying and gliding, the Wagon Star which can't boost drift but has consistently high speed and acceleration stats, the Formula Star which is uncontested in drag races but cannot turn for shit. Bikes like the Wheelie Bike and Wheelie Scooter can't glide at all but have great maneuverability and boost speeds. There are chariots that are all-around vehicles with no ability to fly, and tanks that struggle to turn normally and instead must use boost charges to make quick adjustments on the fly. There is an incredible amount of variety before you even begin a race, and everyone is sure to find a character and vehicle combo that speaks to their playstyle. The new tracks are also phenomenal, with standouts like Crystalline Fissure, Siberian Highway, and Airtopia Ruins, as well as fan-favorite returning courses like Celestial Valley, Frozen Hillside, and Checker Nights. There's no Grand Prix mode, but there is a checklist with challenges and objectives to complete with plenty of rewards, much like in Super Smash Bros. This is how you'll go about unlocking characters, tracks, vehicles, customization, and more, and this is true for every one of the main modes. Up next is Top Ride, easily the weakest part of Air Riders, but still a good time. It's a top-down racing mode with 9 tracks to choose from. The same mechanics apply with your racer and ride of choice heavily influencing how you play each track. It doesn't have the depth or addictiveness of Air Ride's races, but it's a fun alternative when you're burnt out of Air Ride or the upcoming star of the show, City Trial. City Trial is the main reason you pick up Air Riders over something like Mario Kart. This Battle Royale-esque mode has you and 15 other players battle it out on a large open map, collecting stats, building your desired vehicle combo, fighting bosses, competing in events, and more. At the end of the time limit, you'll compete in a stadium event, much like a Mario Party minigame, where you'll use the vehicle you've been building up to this point to defeat your opponents. It's simple in concept, but ridiculously fun and addictive in execution. So much so that the entire concept was reused in Smash for 3DS's very own City Trial mode, Smash Run, as I've mentioned before. If you've played that, you understand the basics of City Trial. This mode is easily the star of Air Riders, and where I tend to spend most of my time when I pop the game in for a few online matches. My only real critique of City Trial, if you can even call it that, is that the original City Trial map from Kirby Air Ride didn't return. That map is so synonymous with Kirby Air Ride that I was genuinely shocked to not see it included. I understand why it wasn't brought back. With the quadrupled player count and new events, it just wouldn't work as it was in the original game. I still think it could have been enhanced or remade to fit alongside Skya in this new entry, but Skya is a pretty fantastic map in its own right, so there isn't much room to complain. The last main mode is Road Trip, the campaign for Kirby Air Riders. Only about a few hours per run, Road Trip has you partake in challenges while collecting vehicles and stats across the entire adventure, as well as fight a few bosses from the Kirby series like Marks and Zero Two. It's not the most in-depth experience, but it's a great way to get a handle on the mechanics and can be a really fun challenge on the super hard difficulty. I also have to mention the absolutely stellar customization options with an endless supply of stickers, colors, patterns, accessories, effects, and sounds. You can personalize your vehicle to an unreal degree. I'm not much for customization myself. I prefer the standard variety of carts as I set aside a plate of white bread and unseasoned chicken. But I have spent a ton of currency in my market, the online vehicle market where you can buy customized vehicles made by other players, with the prices being set based on how in demand the given design is. If you told me last year that we were going to get a sequel to Kirby Air Ride complete with its own in-game fluctuating economy, I simply would not have believed you. Kirby Air Riders is like a dream come true for me, and easily a contender for my favorite game of 2025. So I hope to see more people give it a chance throughout the Switch 2's lifespan. Sakurai made it his mission to polish and perfect his original work from 2003, and damn did he succeed. Undoubtedly creating one of the best kart racing games ever made. Alright, that's enough glazing Air Riders for the time being. There are still a few more important releases from November worth discussing. Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2 came to Switch 2, nice to see RGG continuing their support of the platform this soon after launch. Tomb Raider Definitive Edition was shadow dropped on the eShop and from what I've heard is a solid port. And Dragon Ball Sparking Zero finally made its way to Switch 2. And Switch 1. That is certainly a fire hazard waiting to happen. There was plenty to play in November, and Nintendo's bi-weekly drop streak wasn't over just yet with one more major release for the year. On December 4th, 2025, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond finally released, and shit! Yeah, unfortunately, Prime 4 isn't the follow-up many wanted to the original trilogy, with a couple of glaring problems bogging down what could have easily been an exciting return for the 3D bounty hunting series. First, the good. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is absolutely gorgeous. With both a 4K 60 FPS quality mode and a 1080p 120 FPS performance mode, this game is a technical showcase on Switch 2, which is funny considering this is also a Switch 1 game. The environments are absolutely gorgeous, with incredible lighting and ambient effects enveloping you in a world unlike any other. This is accompanied by a truly excellent soundtrack, especially after Metroid Dread was lacking in the score department. Prime 4's OST is working triple overtime to sell you on these locales, and it's working. That is unfortunately where my praises end for Prime 4, as this game just doesn't live up to the grand expectations set by the previous 3 entries. The game has 3 problems at its core that I feel hold it back. First, the companions. When it was first revealed that we'd be working alongside the Galactic Federation in this game, I was open to the idea. Samus has had companions in the past, so I was hopeful about their inclusion. Unfortunately, these guys just never stop talking, killing all sense of mood or tone on numerous occasions.
I have no idea what we're doing, but it feels like it's working. This is my work against tougher enemies. That door just opened all by itself. If it's okay with you, I'm gonna tag along. Everything in this jungle's trying to kill us. Samus, please shoot that thing. It won't stop moving. Maybe try your new toy. Come on!
One of Metroid's greatest strengths as a franchise is ambiance and environmental storytelling, so to have these guys quipping or giving me hints on where to go at every waking moment was frustrating, to say the least. My second major issue is Soul Valley, the main hub area for the game. A sprawling desert you need to use your Viola bike to traverse, which is incredibly empty and boring. Every time I was required to re-enter Soul Valley to progress to the next area, I audibly groaned. To me, Metroid has always been about dense and confined areas requiring puzzle solving and critical thinking to maneuver your way through. So to spend a good chunk of Prime 4 in a vast open desert with little to interact with feels antithetical to what Metroid is at its very core. My final issue is that Metroid Prime 4 doesn't feel like much of a Metroidvania at all. Despite unlocking new psychic abilities, I never felt like I was really expanding my moveset or capabilities outside a few select moments. Most of my upgrades were for elemental missiles, which are used to open specific elementally locked doors, which is super lame. And I never felt incentivized to re-explore these older areas because progressing through them felt very linear from the get-go. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is a heavily misguided game, which I largely believe is due to its complicated and extensive development period. While this game didn't hit the mark for me, I think based on the game's narrative there's room open for a 5th entry in the future. And I hope Retro Studios takes the feedback and criticism of Prime 4 to heart to bring this series back to its former glory if Prime 5 is ever going to come to be. Easily my most disappointing release of the year, and maybe ever. Following that up, we have the release of Pokemon Legends ZA Mega Dimension DLC on December 10th. Wow, it is not a good month for me. There are some cool ideas, sure, and new Mega Evolutions, Rogue Battles, and Pokemon to catch is always good to have, but the way you go about progressing in Mega Dimension is so needlessly frustrating and grindy that I nearly put the game down on several occasions, only powering through to full completion because I spent $30 damn on this expansion. I'm getting every penny I can out of it. In Mega Dimension, you enter mysterious rifts around Lumiose City to enter Hyperspace Lumiose, fragmented parts of the city in this soulless void where you can catch Pokemon not usually found in the city. A cool premise for sure, and a neat way of expanding the explorable areas within ZA without leaving the confinements of the city, but the way you access new rifts for legendary and special Pokemon is so ass backwards and insulting to the player's time. To access new rifts, you need to conduct a special search, which you can do by getting 25,000 points by completing objectives within random smaller rifts around the city, much like how you acquire points in the ZA Royale in the base game. The problem then comes after conducting a special search. You aren't guaranteed to actually unlock a rift worth exploring with Pokemon you're missing for your decks or even any Pokemon at all. Sometimes, these rifts just have trainers to battle inside them, which feels pointless for anything other than grinding points to conduct another special search because you can't keep any EXP you gain from battling in Hyperspace Lumiose as the level cap is only temporarily raised to 200. You can find yourself conducting multiple special searches in a row, over and over, and continuously get absolutely nothing worth noting. The randomness of this expansion feels frankly insulting to the player's time and energy, just padding the runtime out for the sake of padding it out with no meaningful content to explore for hours on end. I still enjoyed my time with Legends ZA overall, for sure, but this expansion certainly left a sour taste in my mouth, and I can't see myself revisiting it on repeat playthroughs. After that 1-2 combo of underwhelming Nintendo releases, hopefully Nintendo has something good in store for me. Oh, thank f***, it's a Christmas miracle. There were a surprising number of third-party releases this month as well, considering December is typically a slower month to close out the year. We have Assassin's Creed Shadows, Marvel Cosmic Invasion, Sonic Racing Crossworlds Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, Octopath Traveler 0, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim Anniversary Edition, and Stardew Valley Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. Assassin's Creed Shadows seems to be a decently solid port, one I intend to pick up digitally down the line for a patented Ubisoft deep cut sale for 10 bones or less. Skyrim Anniversary Edition was rough on launch with significant input delay, which has thankfully been fixed since then. Marvel Cosmic Invasion, Octopath Traveler 0, and Stardew Valley all seem to be fantastic additions to the Switch 2 library as well. But the main game of December for me has to be Sonic Racing Crossworlds. Well, I say December very loosely. I actually picked this one up digitally on PS5 back in September when it launched on other platforms, and physically on Switch 2 in March. But the Switch 2 version was released digitally on December 4th, so this is when I'm choosing to talk about it. Man, it is a really great year for kart racers. Between Mario Kart World, Kirby Air Riders, and now Sonic Racing Crossworlds, there's something for everybody. Sonic Racing Crossworlds is unfortunately my least favorite of the 3 releases this year, as there are somewhat glaring problems with the game and a less unique identity in Crossworlds than the other 2 or even previous Sonic Racing games. Crossworld's main gimmick is the Crossworld Gates, big portals that transport you to a completely separate track for the second lap. A refreshingly simple idea with big payoffs, making every single race feel fresh lap to lap. The actual races are fun for the most part, driving on the ground feels responsive, and boat sections across the water allow you to spam jumps for tricks and speed boosts, which is super satisfying. Plane sections are horrendous, they feel clunky and pointless with little to actually do in them. I don't like them and I want them gone. Tracks like Wonder Museum and Coral Town are among my favorites, not just because they don't or barely include flying sections, but because of how engaging the unique track mechanics and layouts are. There are a good couple of misses too. Tracks like Metal Harbor and Blizzard Valley feel incredibly bland layout-wise and visually, or the track gimmick inconveniences the player way too much for how chaotic races already are. The chaoticness mainly comes down to how small the tracks can be and how frequent items are. Even with only 12 players, I find myself more cramped and bumping into other players or walls more than I ever do on Mario Kart World with 24 racers. You can utilize gadgets to slightly tone down the chaoticness with options like Collision Boost or Damage Mercy, but you only get 6 gadget slots, so you end up having to choose between which poorly designed mechanic to protect yourself from while still being susceptible to others. I feel like a lot of gadgets are basically required to make certain aspects of racing feel good. Like air tricks feel incredibly slow and unresponsive without Air Trick Expert, and Ultimate Charge is essentially mandatory if you want to have any success while front running. There's also just not that much meaningful content outside of online race events. There's Red Ring collectibles in the Grand Prix and soundtrack rewards for completing time trials, which is appreciated, but much of the game's unlockable customization is barred behind incredibly tiresome grinding. They are not generous with tickets whatsoever, and it doesn't help that the actual vehicle customization is just kinda lame. To me, a lot of these vehicle designs are really generic and forgettable, more so templates for you to customize than actually cool looking designs to begin with. As I mentioned earlier, vehicle customization is not really that engaging for me specifically, so I found myself sticking to my favorite extreme gear and moving on with my day. Sonic Racing Crossworlds isn't bad by any means, it's definitely a solid time. If Mario Kart World and Kirby Air Riders both don't click with you, there's enjoyment to be had in Sonic's more arcadey and traditional approach to kart racing. But for the asking price of $70 before paid DLC collaborations, I find myself hesitant to recommend this one before the other 2025 kart racers. We end off the year with the Game Awards on December 11th, a solid show this year, with Claire Obscure Expedition 33 taking home a lot of the awards. Honestly, deserved in most cases. Expedition 33 was excellent and easily my personal game of the year as well. On the Nintendo side of things, they took home 2 awards, with Mario Kart World being nominated for Best Family and Best Sports Racing Game and taking home the latter, and Donkey Kong Bonanza being nominated for both Best Family and Game of the Year and taking the former. There were also a few Switch 2 announcements, most notably ports of Phasmophobia and South of Midnight, as well as Capcom's upcoming Pragmata launching day and date with the other platforms alongside an amiibo of Diana. You would think Capcom and Nintendo were in bed together with how much they've been supporting one another this year. Orbitals was also announced, a 2-player co-op action platforming game in the same vein as It Takes Two and Split Fiction with an 80s anime-inspired art direction, launching exclusively on the Switch 2 in 2026. This game looks gorgeous, definitely one to keep an eye out for. And that is Nintendo's 2025. A pretty strong showing in my opinion, with an excellent performance out of the gate with Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. A small hold before another burst of exclusives and high-profile releases between Pokemon Legends ZA, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, Kirby Air Riders, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Here's to hoping 2026 continues the trend. Nintendo started the new year off right by putting Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on Nintendo Switch Online just a few months after I finally bit the bullet and bought a physical copy, so thanks for that, Nintendo. The Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Animal Crossing New Horizons launched on January 15th, 2026 for a whopping $5. This expansion is pretty light on content, to say the least, as most of the new gameplay additions are a part of the 3.0 update, which was released the day prior for both Switch 1 and 2 users. The Switch 2 expansion only included a resolution bump in dock to 4K and 1080p in handheld, mouse and camera support, a new megaphone item that allows you to use the built-in Switch 2 mic to call out to your villagers, and 12-player online sessions instead of the usual 8. Yeah, this should have been a free update. It's tough to really give a shit because it's only $5, but why even bother charging for this small of an update? I presume it's because Nintendo has some internal restrictions that they can only print physical Switch 2 editions of a game if it's published on the eShop with a new title ID, which they don't do with free Switch 2 updates, only Switch 2 editions. I'm glad this game has an up-to-date physical Switch 2 release with the latest updates and content expansions included on the cartridge, but I don't see why they couldn't have found an alternative way to do an updated physical Switch 2 release. The 3.0 update seems to be pretty expansive, to say the least, with collaboration villagers based on characters from The Legend of Zelda and Splatoon, LEGO furniture items, playable NES and Super Nintendo games, the hotel service, where you're tasked with designing rooms for guests to match a specific theme, the reset service with Mr. Rossetti allowing you to instantly clean up areas of your island, and the Slumber Islands, dream worlds with 3 new islands for you to decorate, essentially giving you 3 creative mode islands to mess around on with friends. This update is huge, yes, but much like the 2.0 expansion back in November of 2021, I am already more than New Horizoned out. I'm sure a lot of people will get some good mileage out of this update, but I got my fill with the 100 hours I spent back when the game launched in March of 2020. The only other major Nintendo news of the month came on January 20th, when Nintendo stealth dropped an update for Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, adding Dixie Kong as a playable character, a new turbo mode, and Switch 2 enhancements. What am I supposed to say about this? I guess Nintendo is supplying Donkey Kong Country Returns HD of all things with a Switch 2 patch because there are still physical copies on store shelves. Doesn't make it any less deflating that we get this and still have no patches for games that really need it, like the Xenoblade or Fire Emblem games on Switch. As for third-party support this month, we got a couple of major releases in the form of Dynasty Warriors Origins, Dispatch, The Legend of Heroes Trails Beyond the Horizon, Mio Memories in Orbit, and the big kahuna, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. Square Enix and Nintendo were really pushing this port of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and for good reason. It's an incredibly competent port of the original PS5 release, and could appeal to a lot of the more casual Nintendo fans who recognize Cloud and Sephiroth due to their inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. This is an essentially uncompromised version of Final Fantasy VII Remake, albeit running at 30 FPS and with some fuzzy hair renderings. But this is primarily the same version as other platforms, and it's Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's still fantastic. This was pretty safely my game of the year in 2020, so to have a portable version of this quality is really great to see. The music and voice acting are just as incredible as I remembered, so revisiting this title from start to finish was a joy. Boss battles were just as dynamic and engaging as they were 6 years ago, even without the gameplay improvements made in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. For only $40, you're honestly doing yourself a disservice by not picking this one up. February was a surprisingly stacked month for Nintendo, despite the lack of the anticipated General Direct. Starting with our quarterly report on February 3rd, our updated Switch 2 numbers are at 17.37 million hardware units sold and 37.93 million software units sold. The holiday sales weren't quite enough to hit Nintendo's updated projection of 19 million units, but a holiday boost isn't as needed when you're consistently selling high throughout the year. Following up on the numbers, we got a February Direct in the form of a partner showcase on February 5th. We got another look at Orbitals releasing in the summer, looking great visually as always. Tokyo Scramble was announced as a Switch 2 exclusive, and this does not look good. I mean, it's certainly an interesting concept. Asymmetrical multiplayer games are short in supply. Maybe this is an early look. Another year in development could certainly... Hollow Knight gets a Nintendo Switch 2 edition. The Adventures of Elliot is dated for June 18th, and we get our first look at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on Switch 2, releasing on June 3rd. Just like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth looks to be an incredibly well done port, only missing a bit of foliage and some environmental details, along with the frame rate cut. Digimon Story Time Stranger, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Endless Ragnarok, and a final look at Resident Evil Requiem before it releases at the end of this month. Our final announcements of the presentation were reveals of Bethesda's Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered. Fallout 4 and Indiana Jones were revealed individually a few months back, but Oblivion Remastered is a surprising port. Overall, I think the presentation was just okay. Nothing to really look forward to outside of Rebirth and Indiana Jones, but I'm sure Nintendo will give us a general direct with more games soon enough. For now though, Nintendo has dropped its first Switch 2 exclusive of 2026, Mario Tennis Fever, and it's good? Yeah, after years of lackluster Mario sports games on Switch 1, Mario Tennis Fever provides a level of quality we haven't seen since the Wii and GameCube era of Mario sports games, barring a few exceptions. After Aces supplied the bare minimum amount of content and Ultra Smash killed my family, Mario Tennis Fever offers a surprising amount to do with the largest roster in series history, over 30 different rackets with varying effects and abilities, and 6 main modes to explore. You got your online mode with ranked, casual, and lobby matches, your free play and tournament modes, the Mix It Up mode with special courts and gameplay gimmicks, the Trial Towers with individual themed missions to complete, and the Adventure mode where you can spend half of it in a tutorial zone and the other half questioning why God has allowed this to exist. The Adventure mode is fine, I prefer Aces in this regard. I just have to wonder why the marketing pushed this mode so heavily when it's such a small fraction of the game. The Trial Towers are a much more substantial form of single-player content, with the 3 towers of varying difficulties to complete, with random missions in each. Once you complete all 3, you unlock the All Trials mode, with 100 missions to complete with individual side objectives in each. This is where most of the single-player challenge lies, and it's surprising they decided to keep this mode hidden until release. You already know I went out of my way to do every single one of them. This game is $70. I'm getting my money's worth. The special courts and rally challenges are a really good change of pace, with the Super Mario Bros. Wonder-inspired court being my personal favorite. I just wish there were more of them. They really harken back to the wacky and goofy courts and modes we had in previous entries, such as Mario Power Tennis. That's an element of these Mario sports games that has been missing for a long time. The fun gameplay variety and randomness that sets the Mario sports series aside from traditional sports games. The Fever rackets as well are an excellent way to shake things up. Learning to counter rackets like the Bullet Bill racket and Swerve racket was really challenging. It forced me to rethink how I was approaching my opponent on the fly, and honestly brings a large amount of depth and variety to traditional tennis matches that the series has never had before. I think Mario sports games might finally be back on the right track. Then came the moment we were all waiting for, Virtual Boy on Nintendo Switch Online. I didn't buy it. I mean, come on. I may be a shill who will spend $70 damn on Mario Tennis, but a $25 cardboard headset for Virtual Boy games, that's where I draw the line. Yeah, unfortunately a headset is required to play these Virtual Boy games. Despite the fact that you can see them demoing in 2D just fine in trailers, you have to spend at least $25 on a cardboard headset or $100 on a replica Virtual Boy kit in order to play these games. Why? I mean, I know the answer, it's money, obviously, but as a fan of Nintendo history, I'm thoroughly disappointed. I understand these games were designed with the headset in mind, and experiencing them in 2D sorta defeats the purpose, but it's the Virtual Boy. Who cares? People aren't gonna go out of their way to pick up a headset based on a failed platform just to spend 30 minutes dicking around in Teleroboxer. Just let people play these games however they want. At the end of the day, these are Virtual Boy games, so if you really want to play them, there are ways to do so outside of Nintendo's official methods. I just think this would have been a great opportunity to make this long-forgotten Nintendo platform more accessible. Any day now has finally arrived, as Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition had a Nintendo Switch 2 edition shadow dropped on the eShop on February 19th, just a week after Mario Tennis. Gosh, I hope the target audiences aren't in conflict. Despite waiting for Switch 2 performance enhancements to play this one, Nintendo managed to drop this when I actually don't have my physical copy of Xenoblade X on hand, so I haven't been able to get to it just yet. But maybe that's for the best. It looks like the Switch 2 edition of Xenoblade X launched with a few problems. While it now supports 4K resolution and the increased frame rate to 60 FPS, the long-distance image quality has taken a hit, making textures look smeary and washed out from far away. At the end of the day, the Xenoblade series has never been incredible in terms of graphical fidelity, but I do think it's a little ridiculous for this upgrade to come with such a horrendous caveat and a $5 upgrade fee. It looks like this upgrade may have been outsourced to an outside studio. It doesn't seem to hit Monolith Softs or even Nintendo's usual standard of quality. Hopefully a few patches can round this upgrade out before the physical release launches on April 16th. Rounding out the month, we have our yearly Pokemon Presents for Pokemon Day on February 27th. It's the 30th anniversary of the Pokemon franchise, so everyone expected Game Freak to have some big news in store, and they didn't disappoint. They announced events for the mobile games and the latest titles as per usual. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green were dropping that day on the Switch 1 eShop. Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness was confirmed to be releasing this March on GameCube NSO. Pokemon Pokopia got a special trailer. Pokemon Champions was given a release window of April, and then we got our first look at the next generation of Pokemon, Pokemon Winds and Pokemon Waves. After an entire generation of underwhelming fidelity in the mainline Pokemon games, we finally got an entry hitting the graphical standards set by the PS3. I kid. Pokemon Winds and Waves looks pretty good, all things considered, especially the water effects and volumetric lighting. After Scarlet and Violet, I think even Game Freak realized things needed to change. Pokemon can't release new entries as often as they used to, and that's okay. Pokemon Winds and Pokemon Waves is releasing in 2027, and that's probably for the best. More development time is never a bad thing, and a high-profile franchise like Pokemon deserves more care for its major releases. The new starters look pretty great too. I like all three of them, especially Brout. Little angry-ass bird. In terms of third-party releases this month, things were stacked here as well, with notable releases including Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, Yakuza Kiwami 3 and Dark Ties, Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition, PGA Tour 2K25, Reanimal, ESX Proud Nordics, the Switch 2 editions of Hollow Knight, Subnautica, Subnautica Below Zero, and Balatro, and the heaviest hitter, Capcom's Resident Evil Requiem, alongside ports of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard and Resident Evil Village. I tried out the demos for Dragon Quest VII Reimagined and Yakuza Kiwami 3, both didn't appeal to me too much. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined looks to be a good time, it reviewed well and fans seemed pleased, but I feel obligated to go back and finish Dragon Quest XI or Dragon Quest III HD 2D before I pick up any new entries in the series. Yakuza 3 Kiwami, on the other hand, is not being very well received by fans. Despite the controversial casting of a major character, Kiwami 3 just doesn't seem to be a great remake. The art direction of the original looks incredibly hampered down. Character models have been remade and don't have nearly as much charm, and a massive amount of the side stories have been cut. Nearly 70% of them are completely absent. I'm glad RGG is supporting the Switch 2 and Nintendo platforms with ports after avoiding them for so long, but I wish Yakuza Kiwami 3 and Dark Ties was a better new game for fans to sink their teeth into. I still have yet to play Yakuza 1 and 2 myself, but after I do, I'm unsure if I'll be playing Kiwami 3 or just sticking to the original. As for what third-party game I actually did play this month, Resident Evil Requiem was easily the star of the show. I played this one on PS5, mainly due to the Switch 2 release being a game keycard, but I can't understate how great of a deal the Generation Pack is. For only $90, you get Resident Evil Requiem valued at $70, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard valued at $40, and Resident Evil Village valued at $50. By picking up this bundle, you're saving about $70 out of the gate, and get 3 incredible titles for practically the price of one. Now, obviously Resident Evil 7 and Village are older titles. I doubt it'll be that long before they see deep price cuts on Switch 2, but since recent Nintendo platforms only supported some of the original Resident Evil titles and cloud versions that nobody played, the Generation Pack acts as a great onboarding product for people looking to get into the franchise. As for the game itself, Resident Evil Requiem is incredible. The juxtaposition of swapping between first-person stealth horror segments as Grace Ashcroft and the third-person action horror segments as Leon Kennedy is such a fun dynamic to play around with. Exploring the care center as Grace with limited ammo and movement options made for an overwhelmingly tense and terrifying experience, and swapping to Leon to begin absolutely decimating every night creature that stands in your path feels exhilarating in the best way. I honestly just wish there was more of it. Resident Evil games are never that long, usually averaging around 10 to 15 hours on the first playthrough and getting down to just a few hours in subsequent runs, but these games are built to be replayed many times, and I intend to do so. Easily one of my favorite Resident Evil games in recent memory, and I hope the overwhelming support from Capcom on Switch 2 is a sign of what's to come. I would love a portable version of the modern Resident Evil remakes, especially 2 and 4. If they perform as well as Requiem, 7, and Village do, then we are in for a treat. All 3 games run great, with 7 Biohazard at a nearly locked 60, and Village and Requiem performing at 60 most of the time, with dips into the low 40s and high 30s in the most intensive scenes. It would be nice to have a dedicated 30 FPS frame limit for those who prefer it, but the frame drops never seemed extensive or noticeable enough to distract from the experience. March kicked off with an Indie World Direct on March 3rd. Densha Attack, Toem 2, Moonlighter 2 The Endless Vault, Ratatan, and Blue Prince were among the notable announcements, but nothing that appealed to me personally. Speaking of not appealing to me, Pokemon Pokopia launched on March 5th to glowing reviews. Pokopia turned out to be a much more expansive title than I think anyone initially anticipated. When reviews averaged out in the high 80s, low 90s, I genuinely thought I was being pranked. This is the highest rated Pokemon game ever, scoring better than even the best mainline titles. I have to say, even after the dedicated FOMO period when a game first launches, I still want to pick this one up sooner rather than later. The amount of enormous builds and towns I've seen online reminds me of games like Minecraft in the best of ways, encouraging communities to share their designs and join their friends online to explore each other's worlds. They also gave Kyogre a southern accent for whatever reason, and I really need to experience that for myself. Not to retread what I was saying prior, but it's really disappointing that this game is a game keycard, especially after it's been received so positively. Hopefully in a year or so, I'll find a secondhand copy for a decent price, but until then, I'll have to wait to join in on the Pokopia craze. We then had an onslaught of Nintendo announcements, beginning with the most shocking. Nintendo is suing the United States government for unlawful use of tariffs, stating that the imposed tariffs caused irreparable harm and disrupted business, particularly regarding the cost of accessories and importing costs. Originally, the Switch 2's pre-orders were set to open on April 9th, 2025, but ended up being delayed to April 24th, 2025 to assess potential pricing adjustments in regards to the then newly announced tariffs. While the price of the console itself was unchanged, as Nintendo likely decided to eat the cost of the tariffs in favor of passing the added price onto the consumer, Nintendo Switch 2 accessories like controllers, the camera, and amiibo were hit with price increases between $5 and $15. These tariffs hurt Nintendo's margins, and that's the last thing a company wants to have happen, especially around the launch of their newest major product. We got a bit of news on Mario Day, the final trailer for the Super Mario Galaxy movie, a new trailer for the Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, new Super Mario Legos, and the release date for Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, May 21st. Despite having a firm date set in the upcoming future, pre-orders for Yoshi and the Mysterious Book wouldn't open until March 25th, when Nintendo announced a new pricing model for all upcoming Switch 2 titles. From here on out, digital games will be $10 cheaper than physical games, which in the case of Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, prices the game at $60 digitally and $70 physically. I think this is a good move. It's been long agreed upon that digital games should theoretically be cheaper than physical games, with digital games not requiring any manufacturing or distribution costs. I'm honestly surprised that Nintendo was the first major company to implement a change like this outside of individual publishers. Maybe they haven't seen the sales they've wanted from games like Mario Tennis Fever and want to entice digital customers with a cheaper barrier to entry. More affordable games is always a win in my book, and hey, it looks like Walmart and Amazon will be matching the lower price of digital releases for games with this pricing structure. I normally shop at Best Buy or GameStop for my gaming pickups, but an extra $10 off of every brand new first-party Switch game is too good to pass up on. The Switch 2 got a major firmware update on March 16th, adding the new handheld boost mode, essentially displaying the higher resolution docked mode in handheld, letting all games without dedicated Switch 2 patches take advantage of the larger screen on the Switch 2. This is a fantastic addition, one I'm honestly surprised wasn't here at launch with just how obviously beneficial this is for backwards compatibility. The very next day, on March 17th, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness was added to the GameCube NSO catalog, and this was a big deal for me. I grew up playing this game, or at least repeating the first hour or so of it up to Gadeon Port and Agate Village. Revisiting it on NSO and finally seeing it through to the end was so damn fun, and really makes me appreciate how detailed and full of life the early 3D Pokemon animations were. I'm hoping Winds and Waves can bring back some of that individual Pokemon animation flair they've been missing for a few generations. Lastly, on March 26th, 2026, Super Mario Bros. Wonder Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Meet Up in Bellabelle Park released as the final known Switch 2 Edition up to this point. Thank fucking God! I never want to see a game with 65 characters in its title ever again. Thankfully, Super Mario Bros. Wonder plus Meet Up in Bellabelle Park isn't nearly as exhausting as its extensive title may suggest. This honestly might be the best Switch 2 Edition to date. You got the usual improvements, 4K support, bug fixes, amiibo support, but also a major expansion in the form of local and online minigames. One of the major criticisms of Super Mario Bros. Wonder was how the game lacked the frenetic and chaotic multiplayer elements the new Super Mario Bros. Series was known for, as you can no longer pick up and throw your friends or even interact with them at all if you're playing online. The attractions in Belleville Park aim to restore some of that connectivity with a plethora of competitive and cooperative minigames. There's a lot of variety within these minigames, with co-op missions like Bomb Relay, Donut Block Maker, and Fly Away Captain Toad, as well as competitive minigames like Coin Spree, Zap Frenzy, Survival Challenge, and Phanto Tag. You can play all of these minigames and more locally on one system or online through Game Chat, which is primarily how I tried them out. There's also a handful of online competitive minigames focused mostly on racing using different mechanics like propeller flowers, roller skates, and bouncy balls. These minigames can only be accessed through online friend lobbies with no local multiplayer or online through Game Chat, which is annoying. Even without the addition of new multiplayer content, there's a good bit of single-player additions here as well. Rosalina and Luma have been added as new playable characters, likely to coincide with the release of the Super Mario Galaxy movie and Super Mario Galaxy 1+2 on Switch. There's a brand new power-up, the Flower Pot, which gives you a flower suit and allows you to spawn vertically rising flower projectiles to attack airborne and faraway enemies. I'm happy this is here. It's always cool to see new Mario power-ups, but half the fun of these power-ups is utilizing them in levels specifically built around their inclusion, and as there are no true new levels in this expansion, it feels a bit difficult to properly utilize the power-up in a regular playthrough. At Camp Central, you can access a variety of new Toad Brigade missions with bite-sized challenges to complete. Some of these challenges can be pretty difficult and are super fun to run through and go for the best time. You can unlock new duel badges as rewards, as well as a new teardrop collectible to spend on decorations in Belleville Park. There's also the additional Koopaling bosses and a new mini campaign. These 7 new bosses are easily the best part of the package for me. They're filled with such charm and creativity. My favorite is easily Larry's boss fight in Shining Falls, navigating the falling blocks to avoid being crushed. All the bosses are great though, and really highlight how lacking the original release was in the boss fight department. It really seems like the intention of the developers was to remedy many of the criticisms of the original release. The lack of multiplayer content, the mediocre bosses, the limitation of badges. I honestly think they did a great job. The Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Bros. Wonder is truly the complete package, and a must-buy as a Switch 2 owner in my opinion. As the final Switch 2 edition of Switch 2's first year, and maybe ever, I think they ended on a high note. BBDSBACFS. In terms of third-party releases, there was quite a bit to play this month. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake, Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection, Virtua Fighter 5 Revo, Scott Pilgrim EX, W2K26, Warframe Blueprints, South of Midnight, Kena Bridge of Spirits, Human Fall Flat Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, Super Meat Boy 3D. I didn't play any of them. I was too busy putting in 100 hours into the Tomodachi Life demo. Now that I've finished putting 100 hours into the Tomodachi Life demo, it's time to put an additional 100 hours into the full release. It's not like there was much else to do on Switch 2 this month. I kid, but April was undeniably a slow month for the system. The Switch 2 specifically, I mean. There was actually a good bit of support for the Switch 1 this month. On April 8th, Pokemon Champions released a competitive Pokemon battle simulator developed by Ilka, and if there's anything we can trust Ilka with, it is most certainly not Pokemon. I'm not a competitive Pokemon player by any means, so I hesitate to give any real criticisms regarding the game as a whole. But to put into perspective how polished this game was on release, they released a Switch 2 patch to bump the game's docked resolution from HD to 4K, and it quite literally did not work upon booting the game up. You had to manually undock and redock the game after launching to get the game to display in 4K as intended. If that isn't indicative of the lack of polish in this game, then I don't know what is. The next major Nintendo release comes on April 16th, Tomodachi Life Living the Dream on the Switch 1. I mention this release as it's the first major Nintendo-published Switch 1 game to launch without a dedicated Switch 2 patch to take advantage of the Switch 2 features since the system's launch. Up to this point, the only games without a dedicated patch were games with Switch 2 editions, simultaneous mobile game releases, or Game Boy Advance games. Tomodachi Life Living the Dream is unique, as it doesn't have a Switch 2 patch, but it does have Switch 2 functionality built into it, with the output resolution in handheld mode being 1080p without relying on boost mode, as that would disable the touchscreen for things like face paint and the palette house. I do hope the game gets a dedicated 4K 60 patch at some point, as the Switch 2 could easily handle it, but I think Tomodachi Life is perfectly playable at 1080-30. The game doesn't really demand a high frame rate or resolution, but I also see no reason not to offer it. It can only add to the experience. We also had a major Switch 2 announcement on a random Tuesday morning this month, as on April 21st, we got a new trailer for Splatoon Raiders, confirming its release on July 23rd, with a price tag of 50 bones digitally and 60 bones physically. Man, I really thought a 60-70 digital physical split was going to become the new norm for Nintendo after Yoshi and the Mysterious Book pioneered the approach in the US, but I'm glad to see Nintendo's variable pricing strategy beginning to manifest a bit more transparently since the system's launch. I just hope it doesn't sway much in the other direction. It would really stink to be spending $80 on the next physical release of a Smash Bros. Or 3D Mario. As for third party, it was a pretty average month for the Switch 2. We had games like Goat Simulator, Mouse PI for Hire, Amnesia Rebirth, Overwatch, Darwin's Paradox, Sayonara Wild Hearts Switch 2 Edition, Alien Rogue Incursion, Haste, Content Warning, and of course, the headliner for April, Capcom's Pragmata. This is another one I played on PS5, but much like Resident Evil Requiem, this seems to be an excellent multi-platform release from Capcom. Once again, the unlocked frame rate can be a bit unstable in high-intensity areas, but mostly holds a fluctuating 60 in moment-to-moment gameplay. Pragmata follows Hugh and Diana, an unlikely human and AI duo navigating their way through a perilous moon base, hacking and battling robots with a very unique puzzle and action gameplay loop. Combat has you first hack enemies as Diana to open up their weak points for Hugh, who then takes care of them with his versatile arsenal of weapons and gadgets. Enemies don't slow down or anything while you're solving the hack puzzle, so you also have to keep an eye on Hugh and evade attacks at the same time. There are a ton of mods and upgrades you can use to give yourself perks and combat advantages, and there are a plethora of uncanny enemies to discover. It's an enthralling gameplay loop and solidifies Pragmata as another entry in Capcom's list of 2026 bangers. This has been a very good year for Capcom so far, with the back-to-back releases of Resident Evil Requiem, Monster Hunter Stories 3, Pragmata, other smaller titles and re-releases, all reviewing and selling incredibly well. Their extensive push for day-and-date releases on Switch 2 has been an absolute treat. I can only hope this trend continues with Mega Man Dual Override and Onimusha on the horizon. May was a solid finale for the Switch 2's first year, with a major announcement coming on May 6th. Unprompted and out of nowhere, Nintendo surprised us all with the announcement of Fitness Boxing 3 Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. Yeah, a surprise Nintendo Switch 2 Edition is always welcome, even if it's Fitness Boxing 3. The game will be receiving the usual performance and resolution enhancements, as well as camera support and a new shared communication battle mode where you compete against other players online to achieve the highest score while working out. I've been working on completing my set of every physical first-party Switch game, and Fitness Boxing 3 is on that list, so at least I know that when I eventually pick it up, there will be Switch 2 enhancements to ensure my fitness boxing experience is as fitness boxingness as possible. What else do we have on the list for today? Gotta remember to meal prep. Oh, I have to stop by Macy's. Nintendo is gonna announce a Star Fox Direct 10 minutes before it airs. Gotta take the dogs for a walk. Wait. Was it Macy's or Kohl's? Yeah, at 5:50 p.m. EST on May 6th, Miyamoto from Nintendo's official social media channels tweeted about a Star Fox Direct airing in 10 minutes. Sure, Miyamoto, announced the first Star Fox related thing in 10 years completely unprompted. I wasn't busy or anything anyways. The Star Fox Direct revealed the existence of Star Fox, a brand new Star Fox game, and by brand new, I mean the 5th retelling of the Lylat Wars story from the original Star Fox. I mean, Nintendo obviously wanted to provide an entry point for new fans who are interested in Star Fox due to Fox's appearance in the Super Mario Galaxy movie this past April, and there just weren't enough entry points in the series already. You have Star Fox on Super Nintendo, Star Fox 64, a retelling of Star Fox on Super Nintendo, Star Fox 64 3D, a remaster of Star Fox 64 on 3DS, Star Fox Zero, a reimagining of Star Fox 64 on Wii U, and now Star Fox, a faithful remake of Star Fox 64 on Nintendo Switch 2 with additional features and multiplayer content. If there's a word starting with re, Nintendo has done it to Star Fox. There are 9 main Star Fox games, and 5 of them are the exact same game. This is a bit of hyperbole. There are differences in level design and gameplay structure in games like Star Fox Zero, but at the end of the day, the majority of the Star Fox franchise focuses on retelling the same story from 1993. Would it kill them to do something new? Okay, not that new. These designs gave me some intense whiplash, man. Going from the stylized and cartoonish Fox in the Super Mario Galaxy movie to Fantastic Mr. Fox was not exactly on my 2026 bingo card. I will admit the designs have grown on me over time. At their best in promotional materials and their box art render, these designs look really clean. In-game, however, it's gonna take some time to adjust to the new features of their designs. Otherwise, the game looks great. The art direction is appealing, and the special music release on Nintendo Music gave us a sneak peek at the soundtrack, which is great as Star Fox music always is. As someone who's really only played Star Fox Zero, I'm cautiously looking forward to this one. and I hope it succeeds, as I'd love for more dormant Nintendo franchises to get a chance at resurrection. On May 8th, we found out why Nintendo randomly announced Star Fox a few days back, as it appears on their newest quarterly financial report. We actually have quite a bit to talk about with this report, most notably the major announcement that beginning in September of 2026, the Nintendo Switch 2 will receive a price increase to $500 in the United States and its equivalent in Canada and Europe. In Japan, the original Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 will be receiving a price increase on May 25th, and Nintendo Switch Online will be receiving a price increase on July 1st. Definitely not the news we wanted to see, but with the increase in the price of memory chips or DRAM caused by the massive increase in AI data center productions, this was inevitable. Hey, it may be a bummer that everything everywhere is getting increasingly more unaffordable, but look on the bright side. AI continues to utilize a substantial amount of water and electricity, take human jobs, and helps to spread an unprecedented amount of disinformation. In other news, the updated sales figures are looking quite good this quarter, with the Nintendo Switch 2 reaching 19.86 million hardware units sold and 48.71 million software units sold. Not a huge jump from the 17.438 million split we had last quarter, but the 3-month stretch of January 1st to March 31st is never particularly strong, as it's following the holiday bump and precedes the big summer releases. One particular sales note of interest is the lack of reports on Mario Tennis Fever. Nintendo typically reports a game's sales when it passes the million mark in a quarter, and it doesn't seem like Mario Tennis Fever reached the threshold. Every other Switch 2 game managed to meet that criteria despite the $70 fee of entry. Even Metroid Prime 4, a franchise that notoriously struggles to sell, sold a combined million units between its Switch 1 and 2 counterparts. Pokemon Pokopia sold 4 million units in its first month alone, and yet Tennis Fever is nowhere to be seen on this report. I think it's easy to infer that Mario Tennis Fever didn't match up to Nintendo's expectations sales-wise, and that's likely why we've seen an increase in the variable pricing of Nintendo games as of late. Splatoon Raiders and Star Fox are Nintendo Switch 2 exclusives launching at $50 digitally, $60 physically, likely in part due to a re-evaluation of pricing following the rough sales of Tennis Fever. Listen, I like Mario Tennis Fever. I think it's one of the best Mario sports games Nintendo has released in over a decade. But if that game had to be the ship that sank in order for Nintendo to start passing better deals on to consumers, then so be it. Everybody say thank you, Mario Tennis Fever. On May 21st, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book launched as the final Switch 2 exclusive of the Switch 2's first year on the market. Before release, I was definitely feeling a bit lukewarm about Yoshi's newest outing, but after playing it, I realized I severely misjudged the type of game this is. Yoshi and the Mysterious Book is different compared to previous Yoshi games, with the end objective of each level not being a goalpost, but to make a substantial discovery about the creature you're studying. You enter critter habitats and are expected to interact with these creatures to discover new things about them. What do they taste like? What do they like to eat? How do they interact with their environment? How do other critters interact with them? It's an intrinsically explorative game despite each area being rather small. Your curiosity is the sole motivation behind how much mileage you get from this game. If you're the type who just wants to do the bare minimum objectives and move on to the next thing, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book doesn't ask much of you to see the credits. However, if you're the type who likes to go for 100% completion and see every little detail the game has to offer, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book will keep you busy for quite some time. Throughout your experience, you'll be delighted by the game's watercolor and colored pencil-esque art direction, a consistent aspect of the Yoshi series with its ever-inventive colorful art styles, as well as actually tolerable music. It's not the most memorable soundtrack in my opinion, but I'll take unmemorable and non-distracting over whatever the hell was going on in Crafted World any day. What the f*** were they thinking? Yoshi and the Mysterious Book has a lot to offer if you're willing to look for it, but don't expect the game to be a real challenge. It's more of a relaxing type experience. I'm all for experimentation in staple Nintendo franchises. As much as I liked games like Woolly World and the original Yoshi's Island, a series can only grow if it's willing to take risks and try new things, and Yoshi and the Mysterious Book does just that. May was a pretty solid month for third-party releases, at least when appealing to my tastes. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a pretty fantastic port and is completely on the cartridge. Mina the Hollower finally releases and to absolutely glowing reviews. Tales of Arise Beyond the Dawn Edition comes to Switch 2 after I bought the game near launch for full price and still haven't played it. That stings a bit. Outbound and Bubsy 4D are our indie darlings of the month, and Mixtape released to near universal acclaim because it was barely a game you had to play. I want to give Bubsy 4D a shot down the line as I love a good 3D platformer. Mina the Hollower looks to be a Game of the Year contender, and I'd like to support Yacht Club Games through some trying times, and I want to pick up Indiana Jones at some point to support True Physicals. I just don't have any money. Honestly, too many games and not enough time is a good problem to have. Far better than the launch year of the Switch 1 where months could pass with nothing of note to play. I'd say the Switch 2 is in a pretty good spot in that regard. With that, the Nintendo Switch 2's first year comes to a close. It feels surreal to be experiencing the launch of a Nintendo platform for the first time in nearly a decade, and even more surreal to experience a console launch in the 2020s with actual exclusive video games released in the first year to play on the console. While the lineup may not be for everyone, I found it to appeal to me and my interests specifically, with a new Mario Kart, new 3D Donkey Kong, new Metroid Prime. It's Air Riders, I'm talking about Air Riders. It can be frustrating waiting on the next 3D Zelda, and especially 3D Mario, but considering the scale and popularity of those system sellers, it's pretty safe to assume those games are coming, and likely soon. I'd imagine we'd have one or both in our hands by the end of 2028 at the latest. Even without those heavy hitters, I feel like our first year lineup is incredibly strong. A new mainline Mario Kart with open world exploration and transformative new parkour mechanics, a new 3D Donkey Kong with a heartfelt story and unique terrain destruction, a new take on the Pokemon formula with active RPG combat, a canon prequel to the latest 3D Zelda in the form of a refined Warriors experience, the sequel to a niche yet fan-favorite Kirby Racing spin-off 22 years in the making, the long-awaited fourth installment of the Metroid Prime series, the best Mario Sports entry in years, a worldwide Pokemon spin-off phenomena, and a charming new 2D Yoshi platformer with a gorgeous art style. There's something here for everyone. That's not even counting the Switch 2 edition upgrades to numerous of the Switch 1's most popular titles, the core Switch 1 releases like the remasters of Super Mario Galaxy 1+2 and a brand new Tomodachi Life, or any of the major third-party releases like Hades 2, Resident Evil Requiem, Pragmata, Deltarune, or Hollow Knight Silksong. There is so much to play and enjoy on Nintendo Switch 2 during its first year. I feel as though people often forget how slow the early years of the Switch 1 felt in comparison. None of that to say isn't the Switch 2 hasn't had problems in its first year, no. It took Nintendo a good while to establish some more fair pricing structures. $70 Mario Tennis wasn't going to cut it, and $80 Mario Kart still has people frothing at the mouth a year later, deservedly so. GameCube NSO, while a fantastic addition, has been drip-fed to us over the course of this year. Only 10 games on the service a year after launch, with some of the initially announced titles yet to make it to the service, is pitiful. If you're going to be releasing one game at a time, we should be getting a new GameCube release once a month at the minimum. Game keycards have been a thorn in my side since the system launched. While we have seen less and less use of the format with time, it still pains me to see a new release be tarnished with that ugly white banner. Get it? Tarnished? Okay. Overall, I'm happy with my Switch 2. If Nintendo keeps up the pace they're going, we might witness the birth of Nintendo's greatest console generation ever. With titles on the horizon like Star Fox, Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, and the Duskbloods, I can say for sure that I'll have a lot on my plate in the coming years. Wow, that sure was a lot of nuanced opinions and positivity. I should get back to licking Nintendo's boots clean before Twitter finds me.